The history of Trinidad and Tobago begins with the settlements of the islands by indigenous First Peoples. Both islands were visited by Christopher Columbus on his third voyage in 1498 and claimed in the name of Spain. Trinidad remained in Spanish hands until 1797, but it was largely settled by French colonists. Tobago changed hands between the British, French, Dutch, and Courlanders, but eventually ended up in British hands following the Second Treaty of Paris. In 1889, the two islands were incorporated into a single crown colony. Trinidad and Tobago obtained its independence from the British Empire in 1962 and became a republic in 1976. Pre-Columbian period. Human settlement in Trinidad dates back at least 7,000 years. The earliest settlers, termed Archaic or Ordoroid, are believed to have settled Trinidad and Tobago from northeastern South America around 4000 BCE. 29 archaic sites have been identified, mostly in South Trinidad and Tobago. This includes the 7,000-year-old Banwari Trace site, which is the oldest discovered human settlement in the Eastern Caribbean. Archaic populations were pre-ceramic, and dominated the area until about 200 BCE. Around 250 BCE, the first ceramic-using people in the Caribbean, the Saladoid people, entered Trinidad and Tobago. The earliest evidence of these people come from around 2100 BCE along the banks of the Orinoco River in Venezuela. From Trinidad and Tobago, they are believed to have moved north into the remaining islands of the Caribbean. 37 Saladoid sites have been identified in Trinidad and Tobago, and are located all over the island. After 250 CE, a third group, called the Barrancoid people, settled in southern Trinidad and Tobago after migrating up the Orinoco River toward the sea. The oldest Barrancoid settlement appears to have been at Aran, on the south coast. Following the collapse of Barrancoid communities along the Orinoco around 650 CE, a new group, called the Araquanoid, expanded up the river to the coast. The cultural artifacts of this group were only partly adopted in Trinidad and Tobago and adjacent areas of northeast Venezuela, and as a result, this culture is called Guayabitoid in these areas. Around 1300 CE, a new group appears to have settled in Trinidad and Tobago and introduced new cultural attributes which largely replaced the Guayabitoid culture. Termed the Mayoid cultural tradition, this represents the native tribes which were present in Trinidad and Tobago at the time of European arrival. Their distinct pottery and artifacts survive until 1800, but after this time they were largely assimilated into mainstream Trinidad and Tobago society. These included the Nepoya and Sepoya and the Yao. They have generally been called Arawaks and Caribs. These were largely wiped out by the Spanish colonizers under the encomienda system. Under this system, which was basically a form of slavery, Spanish encomenderos forced the Amerindians to work for them in exchange for Spanish protection and conversion to Christianity. The survivors were first organized into missions by the Capuchin friars, and then gradually assimilated. Spanish period. The arrival of Columbus. The first ever contact with Europeans occurred when Christopher Columbus, who was on his third voyage of exploration, arrived at noon on July 31, 1498. He landed at a harbor he called Point Galera, while naming the island Trinidad, before proceeding into the Gulf of Paria via the Serpent's Mouth and the Caribbean Sea via Dragon's Mouth. Colonial settlement of Trinidad. Trinidad is reported to have been densely populated at the beginning of the colonial period. Although in 1510 Trinidad was said to have the only peaceful Indians along the whole South American coast, demand for slaves to supply the pearl fisheries in nearby Isla Margarita led to them being declared Caribs in 1511. As a consequence of this, Trinidad and Tobago became the focus of Spanish slaving raids, primarily to supply Margarita's pearl fisheries. In 1530 Antonio Sedeno was appointed governor. Granted a contract to settle Trinidad, with an eye toward discovering long-rumored El Dorado and controlling the trade in slaves. In 1532 he attempted to establish a settlement, but was driven off the island following the Battle of Cumucurapo. He withdrew to Margarita, but he returned a year later and built a settlement at Cumucurapo. After failing to attract more settlers to Trinidad, Sedeno was forced to withdraw in 1534. In 1553 Juan Sedeno was authorized to settle Trinidad, but the contract was never fulfilled. In 1569 Juan Troqui Ponce de León built the town of the Circumcision, probably around modern La Ventil. In 1570 this settlement was abandoned. In 1592 Antonio de Barrio established the first lasting settlement, the town of San Jose de Orona. Sir Walter Raleigh, who was searching for El Dorado, arrived in Trinidad on March 22, 1595 and soon attacked San Jose and captured and interrogated de Barrio, obtaining much information from him and from the cacique Topiawari. Lack of Spanish ships arriving on a regular basis forced the settlers to trade with the English, French, and Dutch, in violation of the Spanish exclusive. The Spanish also lacked the means to defend the colony, which consisted of only 24 Spanish settlers in 1625. Thus the Dutch attacked St. Joseph with impunity in 1637. By 1671, the island included 80 settlers and 80 domesticated Amerindians. By 1772, the Spanish capital of St. Joseph had a population of 326 Spaniards and 417 Amerindians. Yet the houses consisted of mud huts with thatch roofs. In general, lacking gold, the island was poor and undeveloped, inducing many to leave. The Captaincy General of Venezuela was created on September 8, 1777, through the royal decree of graces of Charles III of Bourbon, to provide more autonomy for the provinces of Venezuela, previously under the jurisdiction of the Viceroyalty of New Granada and the Audiencia of Santo Domingo. The Crown established a unified government in political, military, fiscal and judicial affairs. Its creation was part of the Bourbon reforms and laid the groundwork for the future nation of Venezuela, in particular by orienting the province of Maracaibo towards the province of Caracas. Colonial settlement of Tobago. In Tobago, the first Dutch colony of Nieuw Valkeren was short-lived. 68 colonists established Fort Vlissingen near modern Plymouth in 1628. They were reinforced by a few hundred more settlers from Zeeland in 1629 and 1632. Attempted colonies by Courland in 1637, 1639, and 1642 in England in 1649, 1642, and 1647 all failed. In May and September 1654, Kurish and Dutch colonies were re-established successfully. The Kurish colony of Nieuw-Courland was centered at Fort Jacob on Great Courland Bay. The Dutch colony on the other side of the island had 3 forts, Lampsensburg, Beveren, and Bella Vista. In 1658, 500 Frenchmen joined the Dutch colony but formed their own settlement called Three Rivers. On December 11, 1659, the Courlanders peaceably surrendered their colony to the Dutch. At the time, the island held about 1,500 Europeans and around 7,000 African slaves working on 120 plantations, supporting 6 or 7 sugar mills and 2 rum distilleries. British Jamaican pirates captured the island in January 1666. The official English garrison surrendered to a French attack in August the same year. The Dutch Admiral Abraham Crynson reclaimed a deserted colony in April 1667 and re-established a fort. An attempt to restore the Kurish Fort Jacob was suppressed in December 1668. In December 1672, the British attacked and destroyed the Dutch colony as part of the Third Anglo-Dutch War. Dutch control was regained under the status quo ante provisions of the Second Treaty of Westminster in 1674. In September 1676, Fort Stereskens was constructed near the ruins of Fort Vlissingen. This star fort was reinforced in February 1677, but French attacks in February, March, and December of that year finally succeeded in killing the Dutch governor and capturing the island. In 1749, Britain and France agreed to keep the island neutral, but Britain took control after 1763, prompting France to capture the island in 1781, then Britain to recapture the island in 1793. The population in 1771 was 5,084, of which only 243 were white and 4,716 were slaves. In 1791 the population was 15,020, of which 541 were white and 14,170 were slaves. There were then 37 sugar factories, 99 cotton factories, and 4 coffee factories. After nutmeg was discovered in 1768, 40 nutmeg plantations were started. The island became a British acquisition for good in 1802, with a ratified treaty in 1814. Spanish missions in Trinidad. Spanish missions were established as part of the Spanish colonization here as in its other New World conquests. In 1687 the Catalan Capuchin friars were given responsibility for the conversion of the indigenous population of Trinidad and the Guianas. Tensions between priests and Amerindians led to the Arena massacre of 1699, wherein the Amerindians murdered the priests. After being hunted by the Spanish, the survivors are reported to have committed suicide by jumping off cliffs into the sea. In 1713 the missions were handed over to the secular clergy. Due to shortages of missionaries, although the missions were established, they often went without Christian instruction for long periods of time. Between 1687 and 1700 several missions were founded in Trinidad, but only 4 survived as Amerindian villages throughout the 18th century: La Annunciata de Nazaret de Savannah Grande, Purísima Concepción de María Santísima de Guairai, Santa Ana de Sabaneta, Nuestra Señora de Montserrat. The mission of Santa Rosa de Arima was established in 1789 when Amerindians from the former encomiendas of Tacarigua and Arauca were relocated further east and settled in Santa Rosa close to today's town of Arima. French settlement in Trinidad. Although Spanish settlement began in the 16th century, the census of 1777 recorded only 2,763 people as living on the island, including some 2,000 Arawaks. In 1777, Rome de Saint Laurent proposed French planters from the islands of Martinique, Guadeloupe, Dominica, Saint Lucia, Saint Vincent, and Grenada, and their African slaves, immigrate to Trinidad. He estimated 1,532 whites, with 33,322 of their slaves, would be interested in such a proposal. The Spanish gave many incentives to lure settlers to the island, including exemption from taxes for 10 years and land grants in accordance to the terms set out in the cedula. In 1783, the proclamation of a cedula of population by the Spanish crown granted 32 acres of land to each Roman Catholic who settled in Trinidad and half as much for each slave that they brought. Uniquely, 16 acres was offered to each free-colored or free person of color, and half as much for each slave they brought. French planters with their slaves, free-coloreds and mulattoes from neighboring islands of Grenada, Guadeloupe, Martinique and Dominica migrated to the Trinidad during the French Revolution. These new immigrants establishing local communities of Blanchisseuse, Champs-Fleur, Péramin, Cascade, Carenage, and La Ventile. This resulted in Trinidad having the unique feature of a large French-speaking free-colored slave-owning class. By the time the island was surrendered to the British in 1797, the population had increased to 17,643, 2,086 whites, 4,466 free people of color, 1,082 Amerindians, and 10,009 African slaves. In addition, there were 159 sugar estates, 130 coffee estates, 60 cocoa estates, and 103 cotton estates. Yet, the island remained unfortified. British period. In 1797, a British force led by General Sir Ralph Abercrombie launched the invasion of Trinidad. His squadron sailed through the Bocas and anchored off the coast of Chaguaramas. The Spanish governor Chacon decided to capitulate without fighting. Trinidad thus became a British crown colony, with a French-speaking population and Spanish laws. British rule was formalized under the Treaty of Amiens. British rule led to an influx of settlers from the United Kingdom and the British colonies of the Eastern Caribbean. English, Scots, Irish, German and Italian families arrived. Under British rule, new estates were created and the import of slaves did increase, but this was the period of abolitionism in England and the slave trade was under attack. Slavery was abolished in 1833, after which former slaves served an apprenticeship period which ended on August 1, 1838 with full emancipation. An overview of the population statistics in 1838, however, clearly reveals the contrast between Trinidad and its neighboring islands. Upon emancipation of the slaves in 1838, Trinidad had only 17,439 slaves, with 80% of slave owners having fewer than 10 slaves each. In contrast, at twice the size of Trinidad, Jamaica had roughly 360,000 slaves. On October 20, 1889, the British government made Tobago a ward of Trinidad. End of slavery. In August 1816, 700 former slaves from the USA arrived, having served for 14 months in the Corps of Colonial Marines at the Royal Naval Dockyard, Bermuda. After rejecting British government orders for transfer to the West India regiments, and on the Admiralty refusing to continue responsibility for them, they finally accepted, but only with reluctance, a government offer of settlement in Trinidad. These ex-colonial Marines were organized by the authorities in villages according to their military companies. In Trinidad and Tobago, as in other Caribbean slave colonies, an attempt was made to circumvent the abolition of slavery in 1833. The first announcement from Whitehall in England that slaves would be totally freed by 1840 was made in 1833. In the meantime, slaves on plantations were expected to remain where they were and work as apprentices for the next 6 years. Trinidad and Tobago demonstrated a successful use of nonviolent protest and passive resistance. On August 1, 1834, an unarmed group of mainly elderly ex-slaves being addressed by the governor at Government House about the new laws, began chanting, "Pa de Sixens," point to Sixens, drowning out the voice of the governor. Peaceful protests continued until a resolution to abolish apprenticeship was passed and de facto freedom was achieved. This may have been partially due to the influence of Dr. Jean-Baptiste Philippe's book A Free Mulatto. At the request of Governor Sir George Fitzgerald Hill, on 25 July, Dr. Jean-Baptiste Philippe, the first colored member of the council, proposed a resolution to end apprenticeship, and this was passed. Full emancipation for all was finally legally granted ahead of schedule on August 1, 1838. Agricultural development and indentured labor. The sugarcane plantations which dominated the economy of Trinidad and Tobago in the 19th century gradually gave ground to the cultivation of cacao. Trinidad and Tobago chocolate became a high-priced, much sought-after commodity. The colonial government opened land to settlers interested in establishing cacao estates. French Creoles were being marginalized economically by large English business concerns who were buying up sugar plantations, and this gave them a fresh avenue of economic development. Venezuelan farmers with experience in cacao cultivation were also encouraged to settle in Trinidad and Tobago, where they provided much of the early labor in these estates. Many of the former cocoa-producing areas of Trinidad retain a distinctly Spanish flavor, and many of the descendants of the cocoa panuels remain in these areas, including Trinidad and Tobago's most famous cricketer, Brian Lara. In 1844, the British government allowed the immigration of 2,500 Indian workers as indentured servants, from Calcutta and Madras. According to Williams, this was an effort to provide an adequate and dependable supply of labor. 1/3 of the cost of passage, including return, was to borne as a public expense. Additional funds were provided for the Office of Protector of Immigrants, medical and police services. Wages were set at $2.40 per month for males, and $1.45 per month for females. In 1899, the working day was fixed at 9 hours. They could buy a plot of land in exchange for return passage. Between 1838 and 1917, 145,000 Indians immigrated to Trinidad. There were also workers brought from China at about the same time. In Trinidad there were, about 20 years ago, 4,000 or 5,000 Chinese, but they have decreased to probably about 2,000 or 3,000. They used to work in sugar plantations, but are now principally shopkeepers, as well as general merchants, miners and railway builders, etc. Many Indian immigrants who had completed their indentureship also established cocoa estates, most notable of them being Haji Goko ol Mia, a Kashmiri-born immigrant who went on to become one of the wealthiest men in Trinidad and Tobago. The Indian community has steadily prospered and grown until now it makes up about 35% of the population of the nation. The arrival of witches' broom and black pod diseases in the 1930s, coupled with the Great Depression, destroyed the cacao industry in Trinidad and Tobago. Although prices for Trinidad and Tobago cocoa beans remains high on the world markets, cocoa is no more than a marginal crop. Relations between the Indian immigrants, and both the British, and the black population were generally strained, and occasionally erupted into violence such as the 1884 Hosey Massacre. Discovery of oil. The American Merrimack Oil Company drilled an early oil well at La Brea at Trinidad and Tobago in 1857, where oil was struck at 280 feet. Also mentioned is the pioneering work of Captain Darwin with his Paria Petroleum Company Limited, and Conrad F. Stollmeyer, an entrepreneur of that period who felt that a combustible fuel could not be distilled out of the asphalt from the pitch lake. The other point of view from Captain Darwin was that a combustible fuel, refined from oil drilled from the earth, would be the ideal fuel for the future. In either 1865, 1866, or 1867, according to different accounts, the American civil engineer, Walter Darwin, discovered and produced oil at Ariparo. Efforts in 1867 to begin production by the Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company at La Brea and the Paria Petroleum Company at Ariparo were poorly financed and abandoned after Walter Darwin died of yellow fever. In 1893, Mr. Randolph Rust, along with his neighbor, Mr. Lee Lum, drilled a successful well near Darwin's original one. By early 1907, major drilling operations began, roads and other infrastructure were built. Annual production of oil in Trinidad and Tobago reached 47,000 barrels by 1910 and kept rapidly increasing year by year. Estimated oil production in Trinidad and Tobago in 2005 was about 150,000 barrels/d. 20th century political development. West Indian Federation and independence. Trinidad was ruled as a crown colony with no elected representation until 1925. Although Tobago had an elected assembly, this was dissolved prior to the union of the two islands. In 1925, the first elections to the Legislative Council were held. 7 of the 13 members were elected, the others were nominated by the governor. The franchise was determined by income, property and residence qualifications, and was limited to men over the age of 21 and women over the age of 30. The 1946 elections were the first with universal adult suffrage. Labor riots in 1937 led by T.U.B. Butler shook the country and led to the formation of the modern trade union movement. Butler was jailed from 1937 to 1939, but was rearrested when the United Kingdom entered World War II and jailed for the duration of the war. After his release in 1945, Butler reorganized his political party, the British Empire Citizens and Workers' Home Rule Party. This party won a plurality in the 1950 general elections. The establishment feared Butler as a radical and instead Albert Gomez became the first chief minister of Trinidad and Tobago. 1956 general elections saw the emergence of the People's National Movement under the leadership of Eric Williams. The PNM, opposed by Dr. Rudranath Kapildeo of the Democratic Labour Party and Ashford Sinanan, who later founded the West Indian National Party, continued to dominate politics in Trinidad and Tobago until 1986. The party won every general election between 1956 and 1981. Williams became prime minister at independence, and remained in that position until his death in 1981. In 1958, the United Kingdom tried to establish an independent West Indies Federation comprising most of the former British West Indies. However, disagreement over the structure of the federation led to Jamaica's withdrawal. Eric Williams responded to this with his now famous calculation 1 from 10 leaves not. Trinidad and Tobago chose not to bear the financial burden without Jamaica's assistance, and the federation collapsed. Trinidad and Tobago achieved full independence via the Trinidad and Tobago Independence Act 1962 on August 31, 1962 within the Commonwealth with Queen Elizabeth II as its titular head of state. On August 1, 1976, the country became a republic, and the last Governor-General, Sir Ellis Clark, became the first president. In 1968, the National Joint Action Committee was formed by members of the Guild of Undergraduates at the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies, under the leadership of Geddes Granger. In 1969, it was formally launched to protest the arrest of West Indian students at Sir George Williams University in Montreal. Together with trade unions and other groups, this led to the birth of the Black Power movement. In 1970, a series of marches and strikes led to the declaration of a state of emergency and the arrest of 15 Black Power leaders. In sympathy with the arrested leaders, a portion of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment, led by Rafiq Shah and Rex LaSalle, mutinied and took hostages at the Teteran barracks. However, the Coast Guard remained loyal and was able to isolate the mutineers at Teteran. After 5 days, the mutineers surrendered. Political difficulties in the post-Black Power era culminated in the no-vote campaign of 1971. In 1973, in the face of a collapsing economy, Eric Williams was prepared to resign as prime minister. However, the outbreak of the 1973 Arab-Israeli War led to the recovery of oil prices and Williams remained in office. The high oil prices of the 1970s and early 1980s led to an oil boom which resulted in a large increase in salaries, standards of living, and corruption. In 1979, construction on the Eric Williams Plaza began. It would eventually finish in 1986. It remained the tallest building in Trinidad and Tobago until the construction of the Nicholas Tower in 2003. Williams died in office in 1981. The PNM remained in power following the death of Dr. Williams, but its 30-year rule ended in 1986 when the National Alliance for Reconstruction, a multi-ethnic coalition aimed at uniting Trinidadians of Afro-Trinidadian and Indo-Trinidadian descent, won a landslide victory by capturing 33 of 36 seats. Tobago's A.N. R. Robinson, the political leader of the NAR, was named Prime Minister. The NAR also won 11 of the 12 seats in the Tobago House of Assembly. The NAR began to break down when the Indian component withdrew in 1988. Bastio Pondy, leader of the old United Labour Front, formed the new opposition with the United National Congress. The NAR's margin was immediately reduced to 27 seats, with 6 for the UNC and 3 for the PNM. Sexual Offences Act of 1986. The Sexual Offences Act was passed by the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in 1986, serving as an act to repeal and replace the laws of Trinidad and Tobago relating to sexual crimes, to the procuration, abduction and prostitution of persons and to kindred offences. The Sexual Offences Act consisted of 35 provisions, 6 of which have since been repealed. The Act functioned to criminalize a number of sexual acts, including acts of incest, buggery, rape, bestiality, abduction, and forceful intercourse within a marriage. The crime of buggery is punishable by 10 years of imprisonment if found guilty. Criticism of Sexual Offences Act. The Sexual Offences Act received criticism in its criminalization of non-procreative sex, homosexual intercourse, and sex work performed by prostitutes. In M. Jackie Alexander's article Not Just Body Can Be a Citizen, The Politics of Law, Sexuality, and Post-Coloniality in Trinidad and Tobago, Alexander details the ways the Sexual Offences Act of 1986 regulated and enforced conjugal heterosexuality by punishing deviant sexual activities, and conflated violent acts of heterosexuality with non-procreative sexual activity. The crime of marital rape, while punishable by 15 years imprisonment, was not referred to as such, but instead referred to as forceful intercourse between a husband and his wife, without her consent. 1990 Jamaat al-Muslimin coup attempt. In July 1990, the Jamaat al-Muslimin, an extremist black Muslim group with an unresolved grievance against the government over land claims, tried to overthrow the NAR government. The group held the Prime Minister and members of Parliament hostage for 5 days while rioting shook Port of Spain. After a long standoff with the police and military, the Jamaat al-Muslimin leader, Yashin Abu Bakr, and his followers surrendered to Trinidadian authorities. Having had the matter referred back to the local courts by the Privy Council with a clear indication of a view that the amnesty was valid, in July 1992, the High Court upheld the validity of a government amnesty given to the Jamaat members during the hostage crisis. Abu Bakr and 113 other Jamaat members were jailed for 2 years while the courts debated the amnesty's validity. All 114 members were eventually released. Subsequent to this, the UK Privy Council deemed the amnesty invalid but expressed the view that it would be improper to rearrest the 114 accused. Later developments. In December 1991, the NAR captured only the 2 districts in Tobago. The PNM, led by Patrick Manning, carried a majority of 21 seats, and the UNC came in second. Manning became the new Prime Minister and Bastio Pondy continued to lead the opposition. In November 1995, Manning called early elections, in which the PNM and UNC both won 17 seats and the NAR won 2 seats. The UNC allied with the NAR and formed the new government, with Pondy becoming Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of Indo-Trinidadian descent. Elections held in December 2000 returned the UNC to power when they won 19 seats, while the opposition PNM won 16, and the NAR won. The UNC government fell in October 2001 with the defection of 3 of its parliamentarians amidst allegations of corruption in the then UNC government, and the December 2001 elections resulted in an even 18-18 split between the UNC and the PNM. President Robinson appointed Patrick Manning Prime Minister despite the fact that the UNC won the popular vote and that Pondy was the sitting Prime Minister. Despite the fact that Manning was unable to attract a majority, he delayed calling elections until October 2002. The PNM formed the next government after winning 20 seats, while the UNC won 16. Both parties are committed to free market economic policies and increased foreign investment. Trinidad and Tobago has remained cooperative with the United States in the regional fight against narcotics trafficking and on other issues. The serious crime situation in the country has led to a severe deterioration in security conditions in the country. In addition, a resurgent Jamaat al-Muslimin continues to be a threat to stability. On May 26, 2010, Kamla Prasad Bisesar, leader of the People's Partnership, was sworn in as the country's first female prime minister. On August 21, 2011, she asked President George Maxwell Richards to declare a limited state of emergency. Dr. Ket Rowley is now Prime Minister. On March 19, 2018, Trinidad's first female president, Ms. Paula May Weeks, was sworn in. In August 2020, the governing People's National Movement won general election, meaning the incumbent Prime Minister Keith Rowley will serve a second term. The present-day Republic of Tunisia, al-Jumhuriyyah at-Tunisiyyah, is situated in northern Africa. Geographically situated between Libya to the east, Algeria to the west and the Mediterranean Sea to the north. Tunis is the capital and the largest city. It is near the ancient site of the city of Carthage. Throughout its recorded history, the physical features and environment of the land of Tunisia have remained fairly constant, although during ancient times more abundant forests grew in the north, and earlier in prehistory the Sahara to the south was not an arid desert. The weather is temperate in the north, which enjoys a Mediterranean climate with mild rainy winters and hot dry summers, the terrain being wooded and fertile. The Medjerda River Valley is currently valuable farmland. Along the eastern coast the central plains enjoy a moderate climate with less rainfall but significant precipitation in the form of heavy dews. These coastlands are currently used for orchards and grazing. Near the mountainous Algerian border rises Jebel Chambi, the highest point in the country at 1,544 meters. In the near south, a belt of salt lakes running east-west cuts across the country. Further south lies the Sahara Desert, including the sand dunes of the Grand Erg Oriental. Early history. First peoples. Stone Age tools dating from the Middle Stone Age found near Libya are the earliest evidence of human activity in the region. Finds have been made of stone blades, tools, and small figurines of the Capsian culture, which lasted from around 10,000 to 6,000 BC. Seasonal migration routes evidence their ancient journeys. Saharan rock art, consisting of inscriptions and paintings that show design patterns as well as figures of animals and of humans, are attributed to the Berbers and also to black Africans from the south. Dating these outdoor artworks has proven difficult and unsatisfactory. Egyptian influence is thought very unlikely. Among the animals depicted, alone or in stage scenes, are large horned buffalo, elephants, donkeys, colts, rams, herds of cattle, a lion and lioness with 3 cubs, leopards or cheetahs, hogs, jackals, rhinoceroses, giraffes, hippopotamus, a hunting dog, and various antelope. Human hunters may wear animal masks and carry their weapons. Herders are shown with elaborate head ornamentation. A few other human figures are shown dancing, while others are driving chariots or riding camels. By 5,000 years ago, a Neolithic culture was evolving among the sedentary Proto-Berbers of the Maghreb in northwest Africa, characterized by the practice of agriculture and animal domestication, as well as the making of pottery and finely chipped stone arrowheads. They planted wheat, barley, beans and chickpeas in their fields, and used ceramic bowls and basins, goblets, plates, and large cooking dishes daily. These were stored by hanging on the walls of their domiciles. Archaeological evidence shows these Proto-Berbers were already farmers with a strong pastoral element in their economy and fairly elaborate cemeteries, well over 1,000 years before the Phoenicians arrived to found Carthage. Individual wealth was measured among the nomadic herders of the south by the number of sheep, goats, and cattle a man possessed. Finds of scraps of cloth woven in stripes of different colors indicate that these groups wove fabrics. The religion of the ancient Berbers is undocumented and only funerary rites can be reconstructed from archaeological evidence. Burial sites provide an early indication of religious beliefs. Almost 60,000 tombs are located in the Fezzan alone, according to the Italian scholar Giacomo Caputo. A more recent tomb, the Medjerda in eastern Algeria, still stands. Built for a Berber king and traditionally assigned to Massinissa, it may have belonged instead to his father Gala. The architecture of the elegant tower tomb of his contemporary Sifax shows Greek or Punic influence. Most other information about Berber religious beliefs comes from later, classical times. The Libyans believed that divine power showed itself in the natural world, and could, for example, inhabit bodies of water or reside in stones, which were objects of worship. Procreative power was symbolized by the bull, the lion, and the ram. Among the Proto-Berbers in the area that is now Tunisia, images of fish, often found in mosaics excavated there, were phallic symbols that fended off the evil eye, while seashells signified the female sex. Herodotus mentions that Libyans of the Nasamone tribe slept on the graves of their ancestors in order to induce dreams for divination. Libyans sacrificed to the sun and to the moon. Eventually supernatural entities became personalized as gods, perhaps influenced by Egyptian or Punic practice, yet the Berbers seemed to be drawn more to the sacred than to the gods. Often only a little more than the names of the Berber deities are known, for example, Bonkor, a leading god. Eventually, Berbero-Libyans came to adopt elements from ancient Egyptian religion. Herodotus writes of the divine oracle sourced in the Egyptian god Ammon located among the Libyans, at the oasis of Siwa. Later, Berber beliefs influenced the Punic religion of Carthage, the city-state founded by the Phoenicians. Egyptian hieroglyphs from the early dynasties also testify to Libyans, the Berbers of the Western Desert. First mentioned as the Tenu during the pre-dynastic reigns of Scorpion II and of Narmer, their appearance is later disclosed in a bas-relief of the 5th dynasty temple of Sahara. Ramses II placed Libyan contingents in his army. Tombs of the 13th century BC show paintings of Libu leaders wearing fine robes, with ostrich feathers in their dreadlocks, short pointed beards, and tattoos on their shoulders and arms. Evidently, Azorkhan the Elder, a Berber of the Meshwesh tribe, became the first Libyan pharaoh. Several decades later, his nephew Shoshenkai became pharaoh of Egypt, and the founder of its 22nd dynasty. In 926 Shoshenkai successfully campaigned to Jerusalem, then ruled by Solomon's heir. For several centuries Egypt was governed by a decentralized system based on the Libyan tribal organization of the Meshwesh. Becoming acculturated, Libyans also served as high priests at Egyptian religious centers. Hence during the classical era of the Mediterranean, all of the Berber peoples of northwest Africa were often known collectively as Libyans. Farther west, foreigners knew some Berbers as Gaetulians, and those Berbers more familiar as the Numidians, and as the Mari or Morisi. These Berber peoples interacted with Phoenicia and Carthage, and later with Rome. Yet prior to this era of history, sedentary rural Berbers apparently lived in semi-independent farming villages, composed of small tribal units under a local leader. Yet seasonally they might leave to find pasture for their herds and flocks. Modern conjecture is that robust feuding between neighborhood clans kept Berber political organization from rising above the village level, yet the military threat from the city-state of Carthage would inspire Berber villages to join together in order to marshal large-scale armed forces under a strong leader. Social techniques from the nearby polity of Carthage were adopted and modified for Berber use. A bilingual urban inscription of the 2nd century BC from Berber Numidia, specifically from the city of Thuga, indicates a complex city administration, with the Berber title GLD being the ruling municipal office of the city government. This office apparently rotated among the members of leading Berber families. Circa 220 BC, in the early light given us by historical accounts, 3 large kingdoms had arisen among the Berbers of northwest Africa: the Mauri under King Baga, the Masili under Sifax, who ruled from 2 capitals, Siga and to the east Sirda, and the Masili ruled by Gela, father of Massinissa. Later Massinissa would receive full honors befitting an important leader from both Roman and Hellenic states. Berber ethnic identities were maintained during the long periods of dominance by Carthage and Rome. During the first centuries of the Islamic era, it was said that the Berber tribes were divided into 2 blocks, the Butur and the Baranis. The etymology of these names is unclear, perhaps deriving from tribal customs for clothing, or perhaps distinguishing the nomad from the farmer. The Arabs drew most of their early recruits from the Butur. Later, legends arose of an obscure, ancient invasion of northwest Africa by the Himyarite Arabs of Yemen, from which a prehistoric ancestry was evidently fabricated. Berber descent from 2 brothers, Burnus and Abtar, who were sons of Bar, the grandson of Canaan. Both Ibn Khaldun and Ibn Hazm as well as Berber genealogists held that the Himyarite Arab ancestry was totally unacceptable. This legendary ancestry, however, played a role in the long Arabization process that continued for centuries among the Berber peoples. In their medieval Islamic history, the Berbers may be divided into three major tribal groups: the Zenata, the Sanaja, and the Mesmuda. The Zenata early on allied more closely with the Arabs and consequently became more Arabized, although Znachia Berber is still spoken in small islands across Algeria and in northern Morocco. The Sanaja are also widely dispersed throughout the Maghreb, among which are the sedentary Kabyle on the coast west of modern Algiers, the nomadic Zanyaga of southern Morocco and the western Sahara to Senegal, and the Tuareg, the well-known camel-breeding nomads of the central Sahara. The descendants of the Mesmuda are sedentary Berbers of Morocco, in the High Atlas, and from Rabat inland to Isru and Kanafra, the most populous of the modern Berber regions. Medieval events in Afriqiya and al-Maghrib often have tribal associations. Linked to the Kabyle Sanaja were the Kutama tribes, whose support helped to establish the Fatimid Caliphate. Their vassals and later successors in Afriqiya, the Zirids, were also Sanaja. The Almoravids first began far south of Morocco, among the Limtuna Sanaja. From the Mesmuda came Ibn Tumart and the Almohad movement, later supported by the Sanaja. Accordingly, it was from among the Mesmuda that the Hafsid dynasty of Tunis originated. Migrating peoples. The historical era opens with the advent of traders coming by sea from the eastern Mediterranean. Eventually they were followed by a stream of colonists, landing and settling along the coasts of Africa and Iberia, and on the islands of the western seas. Technological innovations and economic development in the eastern Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, and along the Nile, increased the demand for various metals not found locally in sufficient quantity. Phoenician traders recognized the relative abundance and low cost of the needed metals among the goods offered for trade by local merchants in Hispania, which spurred trade. In the Phoenician city-state of Tyre, much of this Mediterranean commerce, as well as the corresponding trading settlements located at coastal stops along the way to the west, were directed by the kings, for example, Hiram of Tyre. By 3,000 years ago, the Levant and Hellas had enjoyed remarkable prosperity, resulting in population growth in excess of their economic base. On the other hand, political instability from time to time caused disruption of normal business and resulted in short-term economic distress. City-states started organizing their youth to migrate in groups to locations where the land was less densely settled. Importantly, the number of colonists coming from Greece was much larger than those coming from Phoenicia. To these migrants, lands in the western Mediterranean presented an opportunity and could be reached relatively easily by ship, without marching through foreign territory. Colonists sailed westward following in the wake of their commercial traders. The Greeks arrived later, coming to southern France, southern Italy including Sicily, and eastern Libya. Earlier the Phoenicians had settled in Sardinia, Spain, Morocco, Algeria, Sicily, and Tunisia. In Tunisia the city of Carthage was founded, which would come to rule all the other Phoenician settlements. Tunisia in its history has seen the arrival of many peoples. By 3,000 years ago the Levant and Hellas had prospered, resulting in an excessive population for their economic base. Consequently, city-states started organizing their youth to migrate in groups to where land was less densely settled. To these migrants the western Mediterranean presented an opportunity and could be reached relatively easily by ship, without marching through foreign territory. Such colonists sailed westward across the seas, following the lead of their commercial traders. The Greeks arrived later, coming to southern France, southern Italy including Sicily, and Libya. Earlier the Phoenicians had settled in Sardinia, Spain, Morocco, Algeria, Sicily, and of course, Tunisia. Throughout Tunisia's history many peoples have arrived among the Berbers to settle, most recently the French along with many Italians. Before them came the Ottoman Turks with their multi-ethnic rule, yet earlier the Arabs who brought their language and the religion of Islam, and its calendar. Before them arrived the Byzantines, and the Vandals. Over 2,000 years ago came the Romans, whose empire long governed the region. The Phoenicians founded Carthage close to 3,000 years ago. Also came migrations from the Sahel region of Africa. Perhaps 8 millennia ago, already there were peoples established among whom the Proto-Berbers mingled, and from whom the Berbers would spring, during an era of their ethnogenesis. Carthage. Foundation. The city of Carthage was founded by Phoenicians coming from the eastern Mediterranean coast. Its name, pronounced Carthage in their Punic language, meant new city. The Punic idiom is a Canaanite language, in the group of Northwest Semitic languages. Timaeus of Taormina, a 3rd century BC Greek historian from Sicily, gives the date of the founding of Carthage as 38 years before the First Olympiad, which in today's calendar would be the year 814 BC. Timaeus in Sicily was proximus to Carthaginians and their version of the city's foundation. His date is generally accepted as approximate. Ancient authors, such as Sallust and Pliny the Elder, give founding dates several hundred years earlier for other Phoenician cities in the western Mediterranean, such as Utica and Gades, but recent archaeology has been unable to verify these earlier dates. It was Tyre, a major maritime city-state of Phoenicia, which first settled Carthage, probably in order to enjoy a permanent station there for its ongoing trade. Legends alive in the African city for centuries assigned its foundation to a queen of Tyre, Elissa, also called Dido. The Roman historian Pompeius Trogus, a near contemporary of Virgil, describes a sinister web of court intrigue which caused Queen Elissa to flee the city of Tyre westward with a fleet of ships. The Roman poet Virgil portrays Dido as the tragic, admirable heroine of his epic the Aeneid, which contains many inventions loosely based on legendary history, and includes the story about how the Phoenician queen acquired the Byrsa. Sovereignty. By the middle of the 6th century BC, Carthage had grown into a fully independent thalassocracy. Under Mago and later his Maganid family, Carthage became preeminent among the Phoenician colonies in the western Mediterranean, which included nearby Utica. Trading partnerships were established among the Numidian Berbers to the west along the African coast as well as to the east in Libya. Other stations were located in southern Sardinia and western Sicily, Ibiza in the Balearics, Lixus south of the Straits, and Gades north of the Straits, with additional trading stations in the south and east of Iberia. Also, Carthage enjoyed an able ally in the Etruscans, who then ruled a powerful state to the north of the infant city of Rome. A merchant sailor of Carthage, Himilco, explored in the Atlantic to the north of the Straits, along the coast of the Lusitanians and perhaps as far as Eastremes. Circa 500 BC. Carthage would soon supplant the Iberian city of Tartessus in carrying the tin trade from Eastremes. Another, Hanno the Navigator, explored the Atlantic to the south, along the African coast well past the river Gambia. The traders of Carthage were known to be secretive about business and particularly about trade routes. It was their practice to keep the straits to the Atlantic close to the Greeks. In the 530s there had been a three-sided naval struggle between the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and the Etrusco-Punic allies. The Greeks lost Corsica to the Etruscans and Sardinia to Carthage. Then the Etruscans attacked Greek colonies in the Campania south of Rome, but unsuccessfully. As an eventual result, Rome threw off their Etruscan kings of the Tarquin dynasty. The Roman Republic and Carthage in 509 entered into a treaty which set out to define their commercial zones. Greek rivalry. The energetic presence of Greek traders and their emporia in the Mediterranean region led to disputes over commercial spheres of influence, especially in Sicily. This Greek threat, plus the foreign conquest of Phoenicia and the Levant, had caused many Phoenician colonies to come under the leadership of Carthage. In 480 BC, Mago's grandson Hamilcar landed a large army in Sicily in order to confront Syracuse on the island's eastern coast, but the Greeks prevailed at the Battle of Himera. A long struggle ensued with intermittent warfare between Syracuse led by, for example, the tyrant Dionysius I, and Carthage led by, for example, Hanno I the Great. Later, near Syracuse Punic armies defeated the Greek leader Agathocles in battle, who then attempted a bold strategic departure by leaving Sicily and landing his forces at Cape Bon near Carthage, frightening the city. Yet Carthage again defeated Agathocles. Greece, preoccupied with its conquest of the Persian Empire in the east, eventually became supplanted in the western Mediterranean by Rome, the new rival of Carthage. All this while Carthage enlarged its commercial sphere, venturing south to develop the Saharan trade, augmenting its markets along the African coast, in southern Iberia, and among the Mediterranean islands, and exploring in the far Atlantic. Carthage also established its authority directly among the Numidian Berber peoples in the lands immediately surrounding the city, which grew ever more prosperous. Religion of Carthage. The Phoenicians of Tyre brought their lifestyle and inherited customs with them to northwest Africa. Their religious practices and beliefs were generally similar to those of their neighbors in Canaan, which in turn shared characteristics common throughout the ancient Semitic world. Several aspects of Canaanite religion have been widely criticized, particularly temple prostitution and child sacrifice. Canaanite religious sense and mythology do not appear as elaborated or developed as those of Mesopotamia. In Canaan, the supreme god was called El, which means God in Common Semitic. The important storm god was called Baal, which means master. Other gods were called after royalty. For example, Melkart means king of the city. The gods of the Semitic pantheon that were worshipped would depend on the identity of the particular city-state or tribe. After being transplanted to Africa far from its regional origins, and after coexisting with the surrounding Berber tribes, the original Phoenician pantheon and ways of worship evolved distinctly over time at the city-state of Carthage. Constitution of Carthage. The government of Carthage was undoubtedly patterned after the Phoenician, especially the mother city of Tyre, but Phoenician cities had kings and Carthage apparently did not. An important office was called in Punic the Suffets. Yet the Suffet at Carthage was more the executive leader, but as well served in a judicial role. Birth and wealth were the initial qualifications. It appears that the Suffet was elected by the citizens, and held office for a one-year term. Probably there were two of them at a time, hence quite comparable to the Roman consulship. A crucial difference was that the Suffet had no military power. Carthaginian generals marshaled mercenary armies and were separately elected. From about 550 to 450 the Maganid family monopolized the top military position. Later the Barcid family acted similarly. Eventually it came to be that, after a war, the commanding general had to testify justifying his actions before a court of 104 judges. Aristotle discusses Carthage in his Politica, describing the city as a mixed constitution, a political arrangement with cohabiting elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. Later Polybius of Megalopolis in his histories would describe the Roman Republic as a mixed constitution in which the consuls were the monarchy, the Senate the aristocracy, and the assemblies the democracy. Evidently Carthage also had an institution of elders who advised the Suffets, similar to the Roman Senate. We do not have a name for this body. At times members would travel with an army general on campaign. Members also formed permanent committees. The institution had several hundred members from the wealthiest class who held office for life. Vacancies were probably filled by co-option. From among its members were selected the 104 judges mentioned above. Later the 104 would come to judge not only army generals but other office holders as well. Aristotle regarded the 104 as most important. He compared it to the Ephorate of Sparta with regard to control over security. In Hannibal's time, such a judge held office for life. At some stage there also came to be independent self-perpetuating boards of 5 who filled vacancies and supervised government administration. Popular assemblies also existed at Carthage. When deadlocked, the Suffets and the quasi-senatorial institution might request the assembly to vote, or in very crucial matters in order to achieve political coherence. The assembly members had no legal wealth or birth qualification. How its members were selected is unknown, for example, whether by festival group or urban ward or another method. The Greeks were favorably impressed by the constitution of Carthage. Aristotle had a study of it made which unfortunately is lost. In the brief approving review of it found in his Politica, Aristotle saw one fault: that focus on pursuit of wealth led to oligarchy. So it was in Carthage. The people were politically passive, popular rights came late. Being a commercial republic fielding a mercenary army, the people were not conscripted for military service, an experience which can foster the feel for popular political action. On the other hand, Carthage was very stable. There were few openings for tyrants. The superiority of their constitution is proved by the fact that the common people remain loyal, noted Aristotle. Only after defeat by Rome devastated Carthage's imperial ambitions did the people express interest in reform. In 196, following the Second Punic War, Hannibal, still greatly admired as a Barcid military leader, was elected Suffet. When his reforms were blocked by a financial official about to become a judge for life, Hannibal rallied the populace against the 104 judges. He proposed a one-year term for the 104, as part of a major civic overhaul. His political opponents cravenly went to Rome and charged Hannibal with conspiracy, with plotting war against Rome in league with Antiochus, the Hellenic ruler of Syria. Although Scipio Africanus resisted such maneuver, eventually Roman intervention forced Hannibal to leave Carthage. Thus corrupt officials of Carthage efficiently blocked Hannibal's efforts at reform. The above description of the constitution basically follows Warmington. Largely it is taken from descriptions by Greek foreigners who likely would see in Carthage reflections of their own institutions. How strong was the Hellenizing influence within Carthage? The basic difficulty is the lack of adequate writings due to the secretive nature of the Punic state as well as to the utter destruction of the capital city and its records. Another view of the constitution of Carthage is given by Charles Picard as follows. Mago was king of Carthage, Punic MLK or Malik, not merely a SFT or Suffet, which then was only a minor official. Mago as MLK was head of state and war leader, being MLK was also a religious office. His family was considered to possess a sacred quality. Mago's office was somewhat similar to that of Pharaoh, but although kept in a family it was not hereditary, it was limited by legal consent. However, the Council of Elders and the Popular Assembly are late institutions. Carthage was founded by the king of Tyre who had a royal monopoly on this trading venture. Accordingly, royal authority was the traditional source of power the MLK of Carthage possessed. Later, as other Phoenician ship companies entered the trading region, and so associated with the city-state, the MLK of Carthage had to keep order among a rich variety of powerful merchants in their negotiations over risky commerce across the seas. The office of MLK began to be transformed, yet it was not until the aristocrats of Carthage became landowners that a council of elders was institutionalized. Punic Wars with Rome. The emergence of the Roman Republic and its developing foreign interest led to sustained rivalry with Carthage for dominion of the western Mediterranean. As early as 509 BC, Carthage and Rome had entered into treaty status, but eventually their opposing positions led to disagreement, alienation, and conflict. The First Punic War started in Sicily. It developed into a naval war in which the Romans learned how to fight at sea and prevailed. Carthage lost Sardinia and its western portion of Sicily. Following their defeat, the mercenary revolt threatened the social order of Carthage, which they survived under their opposing leaders Hanno II the Great, and Hamilcar Barca, father of Hannibal. The Second Punic War started over a dispute concerning Saguntum in Hispania, from whence Hannibal set out, leading his armies over the Alps into Italy. At first Hannibal won great military victories against Rome, at Trasimeno and at Cannae, which came close to destroying Rome's ability to wage war. Yet the majority of Rome's Italian allies remained loyal. Rome drew on all her resources and managed to rebuild her military strength. For many years Hannibal remained on campaign in southern Italy. An attempt in 207 by his brother Hasdrubal to reinforce him failed. Meanwhile, Roman armies were contesting Carthage for the control of Hispania, in 211 the domain of armies under Hannibal's three brothers, and Hasdrubal Gisco. By 206 the Roman general Cornelius Scipio had defeated Punic power there. In 204 Rome landed armies at Utica near Carthage, which forced Hannibal's return. One Numidian king, Syphax, supported Carthage. Another, Massinissa, Rome. At the Battle of Zama in 202 the same Roman general Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal, ending the long war. Carthage lost its trading cities in Hispania and elsewhere in the western Mediterranean, and much of its influence over the Numidian kingdoms in northwest Africa. Carthage became reduced to its immediate surroundings. Also it was required to pay a large indemnity to Rome. Carthage revived, causing great alarm in Rome. The Third Punic War began following the refusal by Carthage to alter the terms of its agreement with Rome. Roman armies again came to Africa and lay siege to the ancient and magnificent city of Carthage, which rejected negotiations. Eventually, the end came. Carthage was destroyed and its citizens enslaved. Afterward the region was annexed by the Roman Republic as the province of Africa. Carthage itself was eventually rebuilt by the Romans. Long after the fall of Rome, the city of Carthage would be again destroyed. Roman province of Africa. Republic and early empire. The province became the scene of military campaigns directed by well-known Romans during the last decades of the Republic. Gaius Marius celebrated his triumph as a result of successfully finishing Rome's war against Jugurtha, the Numidian king. A wealthy novus homo and popularis, Marius was the first Roman general to enlist in his army proletary. He was chosen consul an unprecedented 7 times. The optimate Lucius Cornelius Sulla, later consul, and dictator, had served as quaestor under the military command of Marius in Numidia. There in 106 Sulla persuaded Bocchus to hand over Jugurtha, which ended the war. In 47 BC, Julius Caesar landed in Africa in pursuit of Pompey's remnant army, which was headquartered at Utica, where they enjoyed the support of the Numidian king Juba I. Also present was Cato the Younger, a political leader of Caesar's republican opponents. Caesar's victory nearby at the Battle of Thapsus almost put an end to a phase of the civil war. Cato committed suicide by his sword. Caesar then annexed Numidia. Augustus controlled the Roman state following the civil war that would mark the end of the Roman Republic. He established a quasi-constitutional regime known as the Principate, later to be called the Roman Empire. Augustus circa 27 BC restored Juba II to the throne as king of Mauritania. Educated at Rome and obviously a client king, Juba also wrote books about the culture and history of Africa, and a bestseller about Arabia, writings unfortunately lost. He married Cleopatra Selene, the daughter of Anthony and Cleopatra. After his reign, his kingdom and other lands of the Maghreb were annexed as the Roman provinces of Mauritania Caesarea and Mauritania Tingitana. Renaissance of Carthage. Rebuilding of the city of Carthage began under Augustus and, notwithstanding reported ill omens, Carthage flourished during the 1st and 2nd centuries. The capital of the province of Africa, where a Roman praetor or proconsul resided, was soon moved from nearby Utica back to Carthage. Its rich agriculture made the province wealthy. Olives and grapes were important products, but by its large exports of wheat, it became famous. Marble, wood, and mules were also important exports. New towns were founded, especially in the Medjerda valley near Carthage. Many prior Punic and Berber settlements prospered. Expeditions ventured south into the Sahara. Cornelius Balbus, Roman governor at Utica, in 19 BC occupied Jarama, desert capital of the Garamants in the Fezzan. These Berber Garamants had long time, unpredictable, off-and-on contacts with the Mediterranean. Extensive trade across the Sahara directly with the lands to the south had not yet developed. People from all over the empire began to migrate into Africa province. For example, veterans in early retirement settled in Africa on farming plots promised for their military service. A sizable Latin-speaking population that was multinational developed, which shared the region with those speaking the Punic and Berber languages. The local population began eventually to provide the Roman security forces. That the Romans did not display any racial exclusiveness and were remarkably tolerant of Berber religious cults facilitated local acceptance of their rule. Here the Romans evidently governed well enough that the province of Africa became integrated into the economy and culture of the empire, with Carthage as one of its major cities. Apuleius managed to thrive in the professional and literary communities of Latin-speaking Carthage. A full Berber of Madora whose father was a provincial magistrate, he studied at Carthage, and later at Athens and at Rome, where he evidently served as a legal advocate. He also traveled to Asia Minor and Egypt. Returning to Carthage, he married an older, wealthy widow. He then was prosecuted for using magic to gain her affections. His speech in defense makes up his apology. Apparently he was acquitted. His celebrated work Metamorphosis, or The Golden Ass, is an urbane, extravagant, inventive novel of the ancient world. At Carthage he wrote philosophy, rhetoric, and poetry. Several statues were erected in his honor. Saint Augustine discusses Apuleius in his The City of God. Apuleius used a Latin style that registered as new speech recognized by his literary contemporaries. It expressed the everyday language used by the educated, along with embedded archaisms, which transformed the more formal, classical grammar favored by Cicero, and pointed toward the development of modern Romance idioms. Apuleius was drawn to the mystery religions, particularly the cult of Isis. Many native Berbers adopted to the Mediterranean-wide influences operating in the province, eventually intermarrying, or entering into the local aristocracy. Yet the majority did not. There remained a social hierarchy of the Romanized, the partly assimilated, and the unassimilated, many of whom were Berbers. These imperial distinctions overlay the pre-existing stratification of economic classes. For example, there continued the practice of slavery, and there remained a co-opted remnant of the wealthy Punic aristocracy. The stepped-up pace and economic demands of a cosmopolitan urban life could have a very negative impact on the welfare of the rural poor. Large estates that produced crops for export, often were managed for absentee owners and used slave labor. These occupied lands previously tilled by small local farmers. On another interface, tensions increased between pastoral nomads, who had their herds to graze, and sedentary farmers, with the best land being appropriated for planting, usually by the better connected. These social divisions would manifest in various ways, for example, the collateral revolt in 238, and the radical edge to the Donatist schism. Emperors from Africa. Septimus Severus was born of mixed Punic ancestry in Leptis Magna, Tripolitania, where he spent his youth. Although he was said to speak with a northwest African accent, he and his family were long members of the Roman cosmopolitan elite. His 18-year reign was noted for frontier military campaigns. His wife Julia Domna of Emesa, Syria, was from a prominent family of priestly rulers there. As empress in Rome she cultivated a salon which may have included Ulpian of Tyre, the jurist of Roman law. After Severus, his son Caracalla became emperor. Caracalla's Edict of 212 granted citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. Later, two grand-nephews of Severus through his wife Julia Domna became emperors, Elagabalus who brought the Black Stone of Emesa to Rome, and Severus Alexander born in Caesarea sub-Libano. Though unrelated, the emperor Macrinus came from Il Caesarea in Mauritania. There were also Roman emperors from the province of Africa. In 238 local proprietors rose in revolt, arming their clients and agricultural tenants who entered Istris where they killed their target, a rapacious official and his bodyguards. In open revolt, they then proclaimed as co-emperors the aged governor of the province of Africa, Gordian I, and his son, Gordian II. Gordian I had served at Rome in the Senate and as consul, and had been the governor of various provinces. The very unpopular current emperor Maximinus Thrax was campaigning on the Middle Danube. In Rome the Senate sided with the insurgents of Istris. When the African revolt collapsed under an assault by local forces still loyal to the emperor, the Senate elected two of their number, Balbinus and Pupienus, as co-emperors. Then Maximus Thrax was killed by his disaffected soldiers. Eventually the grandson of Gordian I, Gordian III, of the province of Africa, became the emperor of the Romans, 238 to 244. He died on the Persian frontier. His successor was Philip the Arab. Christianity, its Donatist schism. Two significant theologians arose in the province of Africa. Tertullian was born, lived, and died at Carthage, a convert and a priest. His Latin books were at one time widely known, although he later came to espouse an unforgiving Puritanism, after Montanus. Saint Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, was born at Tagaste in Numidia, his mother being Saint Monica. At Carthage, Augustine received his higher education. While professor of rhetoric at Milano he followed Manichaean teachings. Following his conversion from Manichaeism to Christianity he returned to Africa, where he became a church leader and the author of many works. Augustine remains one of the most prominent and most admired of all Christian theologians. His moral philosophy remains influential, for example, his contribution to the further evolved doctrine of the just war, used to test whether or not a military action may be considered just and ethical. His books are still today widely read and discussed. The Donatist schism was a major disruption. It followed a severe Roman persecution of Christians ordered by the Emperor Diocletian. An earlier persecution had caused divisions over whether or how to accept back into the church contrite Christians who had apostatized under state threats, abuse, or torture. Then in 313 the new Emperor Constantine by the Edict of Milan had granted tolerance to Christianity, himself becoming a Christian. This turnabout led to confusion in the church, which in northwest Africa accentuated the divide between wealthy urban members aligned with the empire, and the local rural poor whose beliefs included social and political dissidents. Christian Berbers tended to be Donatists, although some more assimilated Berbers were Catholic. The Donatists became centered in southern Numidia, the Catholics in Carthage. One issue was whether a priest could perform his spiritual office if not personally worthy. The Donatist schismatics set up parallel churches in order to practice a ritual purity not required by the Catholic Church. Augustine the bishop came to condemn the Donatist throngs for rioting. At one time there were imperial persecutions. Long negotiations lasted until finally the Catholics declared Donatism a heresy in 405, though general tolerance persisted until the ban became enforced late in the 6th century. Fall of the Roman Empire in the West. Vandal Kingdom. In the 5th century the Western Roman Empire was in a steep decline. Carthage and the Roman province of Africa were captured in 439 by the Vandals under Gazaric, becoming the center of their Germanic kingdom. The Western imperial capital at Ravenna recognized his rule in 442. In 455 the Vandals sailed with an army to the city of Rome, which was occupied without resistance and looted. Yet in governing their kingdom the Vandals did not fully maintain their martial culture, having made alliances with Berber forces upon entering the region. In religious policy, the Vandals tried to convert the urban Catholic Christians of Africa to their Arian heresy, for example, by sending the clergy into exile and by expropriating churches. In the 520s their efforts turned to persecution, including martyrdom, all without success. The Berbers remained aloof. In all, Vandal rule would last 94 years. The Vandals did provide functional security and governed with a light hand, so that the former Roman province prospered at first. Roman officials and Roman law continued, and Latin was used for government business. Agriculture provided more than enough to feed the region and trade flourished in the towns. Yet because of their desire to maintain a superiority in status, the Vandals refused to intermarry or agreeably assimilate to the advanced culture of the Romans. Consequently, finer points were overlooked. They failed to sustain in its entirety the workable society. The Berbers' confederacies beyond the frontier grew increasingly powerful and troublesome. Byzantine Empire. The Eastern Romans or Byzantine Empire eventually recaptured northwest Africa in 534, under their celebrated general Belisarius. The Byzantines rebuilt fortifications and border defenses, and entered into treaties with the Berbers. Nevertheless, for many decades security and prosperity were precarious and never fully returned. Direct Byzantine rule didn't extend far beyond the coastal cities. The interior remained under the control of various Berber tribal confederacies. Further west was the Romano-Moor kingdom of Garmul. Early in the 7th century, several Berber groups converted to Catholicism, although other Berbers remained attached to their gods. In the 540s the restored Catholic Church in Africa was disrupted by the Emperor Justinian's position in favor of the monophysite doctrine. In the early 600s AD, the Byzantine Empire entered a period of serious crises that would alter the future of Tunisia. For centuries Rome/Byzantium's greatest enemy had been the Sassanid Persians, and the two powers were chronically at war with each other. The warfare was often intense but usually resulted in small border changes. By the 7th century, however, the situation changed dramatically. Persistent religious discord within the empire, followed by the overthrow of Emperor Maurice by the tyrant Phocas, severely weakened the Byzantines. The Persians invaded the Byzantine Empire, in alliance with the Eurasian Avars and Slavs from the north. Much of the empire was overrun and it seemed the end was near. It was a son of Carthage, so to speak, who managed to play a crucial role in restoring the imperial destiny. The son of the Exarch of Carthage, Flavius Heraclius Augustus, sailed east with an African fleet to the Byzantine capital city of Constantinople and overthrew the usurper Phocas. Heraclius became the Byzantine emperor in 610. He began reorganizing the government and erecting defenses to counter the threats to the capital. Yet the Persians continued their invasion, meeting little resistance, taking Antioch in 611, Jerusalem in 614, and Alexandria in 619, in astonishing victories. His forces soon stood before Constantinople. In response, Heraclius took a great risk and moved an army by ship over the Black Sea, landing near his Armenian allies, and in the fighting managed to outflank the Persians. By 627 Heraclius was marching on their capital Ctesiphon, a complete reversal of fortune. Then in 628 Khosroes II was killed in a revolt by his generals. As a result of these dramatic and tumultuous events, Sassanid Persia was in disarray and confusion, and Byzantines soon retook their provinces of Egypt and Syria, but the religious discord between the local monophysite and Eastern Orthodox Christians returned. Eastern Orthodox Emperor Heraclius, the former Exarch of Africa, attempted to work out a theological compromise, monothelitism, but without any success. Yet events did not rest. To the south, Arab Islamic armies began to stir, unified and energized by the teachings of the Prophet, Muhammad. In 636 at the Battle of Yarmouk to the east of the Sea of Galilee, the Arabs decisively defeated the Byzantine forces. Following the Arab invasion of Egypt in 640, Christian refugees came west into the Exarchate of Africa. Their serious disputes arose within the Catholic Church's pp. Carthage over monophysite doctrines and monothelitism, with Saint Maximus the Confessor leading the Orthodox Catholics. Umayyad Caliphate in Afriqiya. By 661 the Umayyads had taken firm control of the new Muslim state, which it ruled from Damascus. The Caliph Muawiyah could see the foreign lands west of Egypt in terms of the Muslim contest with the Byzantine Empire. Islamic conquest. In 670 an Arab Muslim army under Uqba ibn Nafi, who had commanded an earlier incursion in 666, entered the region of Afriqiya. Arriving by land, the Arabs passed by Byzantine fortified positions along the Mediterranean coast. In the more arid south, the city of Kairouan was established as their base, and the building of its famous mosque begun. From 675 to 682 Dinar ibn Abu al-Muhajir took command of the Arab Muslim army. In the late 670s, this army defeated the Berber forces led by Qaisila, who was taken prisoner. In 682, Uqba ibn Nafi reassumed command. He defeated an alliance of Berber forces near Tahert, then proceeded westward in military triumph, eventually reaching the Atlantic coast, where he lamented that before him there was no more land to conquer for Islam. Episodes from his campaigns became legend throughout the Maghreb. Yet the Berber leader held prisoner, Qaisila, escaped. Later Qaisila led a fresh Berber uprising, which interrupted the conquest and claimed the Arab leader's life. Qaisila then formed an enlarged Berber kingdom. Yet Zuhair b. Qais, the deputy of the fallen Arab leader, enlisted Zenata tribes from Cyrenaica to fight for the cause of Islam, and in 686 managed to overturn Qaisila's newly formed kingdom. Under the Caliph Abd al-Malik, the Umayyad conquest of North Africa was to advance close to completion. In Egypt a new army of 40,000 was assembled, to be commanded by Hassan ibn al-Numan. Meanwhile, the Byzantines had been reinforced. The Arab Muslim army crossed the Cyrene and Tripoli without opposition, then quickly attacked and captured Carthage. The Berbers, however, continued to offer stiff resistance, then being led by a woman of the Jarawa tribe, whom the Arabs called the prophetess. Her actual name was approximately Damia. On the river Nini, an alliance of Berbers under Damia defeated the Muslim armies under al-Numan, who escaped returning to Cyrenaica. Thereupon, the Byzantines took advantage of the Berber victory by reoccupying Carthage. Unlike the Berber Qaisila 10 years earlier, Damia did not establish a larger state, evidently being content to rule merely her own tribe. Some commentators speculate as to Damia the Arabs appeared interested in booty primarily, because she then commenced to ravage and disrupt the region, making it unattractive to raiders looking for spoils of war. Of course, it also made her unpopular to the residents. Yet she did not attack the Muslim base at Kairouan. From Egypt the Caliph Abdul Malik had reinforced al-Numan in 698, who then re-entered Afriqiya. Although she told her two sons to go over to the Arabs, she herself again gave battle. She lost, al-Numan won. It is said at Bir al-Kahina in the Auras, Damia was killed. In 705 Hassan b. al-Numan stormed Carthage, overcame and sacked it, leaving it destroyed. A similar fate befell the city of Utica. Near the ruins of Carthage he founded Tunis as a naval base. Muslim ships began to dominate the Mediterranean coast, hence the Byzantines made their final withdrawal from al-Maghreb. Then al-Numan was replaced as Muslim military leader by Musa ibn Nusair, who substantially completed the conquest of al-Maghreb. He soon took the city of Tangier and appointed as its governor the Berber Tariq ibn Ziyad. Berber role. The Berber people, also known as the Amazigh, converted en masse as tribes and assimilated juridically to the Arabs, writes Professor Hodson. He then comments that the Berbers were to play a role in the West parallel to it played by the Arabs elsewhere in Islam. For centuries the Berbers lived as semi-pastoralists in or near arid lands at the fringes of civilization, sustaining their isolated identity somewhat. Like the Arabs, the Maghreb, islanded between Mediterranean and Sahara, was to the Berbers what Arabia was to the Arabs. Hodson explains, although the Berbers enjoyed more rainfall than the Arabs, their higher mountains made their settlements likewise difficult to access, and though the imperial cities were more proximous, those cities never incorporated the countryside with a network of market towns, but instead remained aloof from the indigenous rural Berbers. A counter-argument would be that the Berbers merely imitated the success of the Arab Muslims. The better historical choice would be more uniquely ethnic and authentic, i.e., to articulate their own inner character and fate. Professor Abdallah Laroui interprets the Northwest African panorama as indicating that the Berbers did in fact carve out for themselves an independent role. From the 1st century BC to the 8th century AD, the will of the Berbers to be themselves is revealed by the continuity of their efforts to reconstitute the kingdoms of the Carthaginian period, and in this sense the movement was crowned with success. By choosing to ally not with nearby Europe, familiar in memory by the Roman past, but rather with the newcomers from distant Arabia, the Berbers knowingly decided their future and historical path. Their hearts opened to the call of Islam because in it they saw a means of national liberation and territorial independence. Environmental and geographic parallels between Berber and Arab are notable, as Hodgson adumbrates. In addition, the languages spoken by the Semitic Arabs and by the Berbers are both members of the same world language family, the Afro-Asiatic, although from two of its different branches. Perhaps this linguistic kinship shares a further resonance, for example, in mythic explanations, popular symbols, and religious preference. Evidently, long before and after the Islamic conquest, there was some popular sense of a strong and long-standing cultural connection between the Berbers and the Semites of the Levant, naturally with regard to Carthage and in addition with regard to links yet more ancient and genetic. These claims of a remote ancestral relationship perhaps facilitated the Berber demand for equal footing with the Arab invaders within the religion of Islam following the conquest. From Cyrenaica to Al-Andalus, the somewhat Arabized Berbers continuously remained in communication with each other throughout the following centuries. As a group, their distinguishing features are easy to discern within Islam. For example, while the ulama in the rest of Islam adopted for the most part either the Hanafi or the Shafi school of law, the Berbers in the West chose the Maliki madhab, developing it in the course of time after their own fashion. Also inducing the Berbers to convert was the early lack of rigor in religious obligations, as well as the prospect of inclusion as warriors in the armies of conquest, with a corresponding share in booty and tribute. A few years later, in 711, the Berber Tariq ibn Ziyad would lead the Muslim invasion of the Visigothic kingdom in Hispania. Additionally, many of the Arabs who came to settle in al-Maghrib were religious and political dissidents, often Kharijites who opposed the Umayyad rulers in Damascus and embraced egalitarian doctrines, both popular positions among the Berbers of northwest Africa. Also, to locate its historical and religious context, the Arab conquest and Berber conversion to Islam followed a long period of polarization of society in the old province of Africa, in which the Donatist schism within Christianity proved instrumental, with the rural Berbers prominent in their descent from the urban orthodoxy of the Roman Church. The Berbers were initially attracted to the Arabs because of their proclivity for the desert and the steppes. After the conquest and following the popular conversion, Ifriqiya constituted a natural and proximate center for an Arab Islamic regime in northwest Africa, the focus of culture and society. It was then the region with the most developed urban, commercial and agricultural infrastructure, essential for such a comprehensive project as Islam. Aghlaibid dynasty under the Abbasids. In the years immediately preceding the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate of Damascus, revolts arose among the Kharijite Berbers in Morocco which eventually disrupted the stability of the entire Maghreb. Although the Kharijites failed to establish lasting institutions, the results of their revolt persisted. Direct rule by the caliphs over Ifriqiya became untenable, even following the rapid establishment of the new Abbasid Caliphate of Baghdad in 750. Also, after several generations a local Arabic-speaking aristocracy emerged, which became resentful of the distant caliphate's interference in local matters. Political culture. The Mohallabids negotiated with the Abbasids a wide discretion in the exercise of their governorship of Ifriqiya. One such governor was al-Aghlab ibn Salim, a forefather of the Aghlaibids. Eventually Mohallabid rule weakened. A minor rebellion in Tunis took on a more ominous turn when it spread to Kairouan. The caliph's governor was unable to restore order. Ibrahim ibn al-Aghlab, a provincial leader, was in command of a disciplined army. He managed to re-establish stability in 797. Later he proposed to the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid that he be granted Ifriqiya as a hereditary fief, with the title of emir. The caliph acquiesced in 800. Thereafter, the Abbasids received an annual tribute and their suzerainty was named in the khutbah at Friday prayers, but their control was largely symbolic. For example, in 864 the Caliph al-Mu'tasim required that a new wing be added to the Zaytuna Mosque in Tunis. From 800 to 909, Ibrahim ibn al-Aghlab and his descendants, known as the Aghlabids, ruled in Afriqiya, as well as in Algeria and in Tripolitania, yet in theory their rule was on behalf of the Abbasid Caliphate. The Aghlabids were predominantly of an Arab tribe, the Bani Tamim. Their military forces were drawn from Arab immigrant warriors, Islamized and bilingual natives, and black slave soldiers. It was on their black soldiery that the rulers often relied. Despite the political peace and stability, followed by an economic expansion and prosperity, and despite a developing culture and grand construction projects, many in the Arabic-speaking elite developed an increasingly critical attitude toward the Aghlabid regime. First, the Arab military officer class was dissatisfied with the legitimacy of the regime and often fell to internal quarreling which could spill over into violent struggles. Their latent hostility surfaced when they began making extortionist demands on the population, as well as by their general insubordination. A dangerous revolt from within the Arab army broke out near Tunis and lasted from 824 until 826. The Aghlabids retreated to the south and were saved only by enlisting the aid of Berbers of the Kharajite Jarid, was put down by the black soldiery. Second, the Muslim ulama looked with reproach on the ruling Aghlabids. Aggravation in religious circles arose primarily from the Islamic lifestyle of the rulers. Disregarding the strong religious sentiments held by the many in the community, often the Aghlabids led lives of pleasure and, for example, were seen drinking wine. Another issue was Aghlabid taxation not sanctioned by the Maliki school of Islamic law. Other opponents criticized their contemptuous treatment of Mawali Berbers who had embraced Islam. The Islamic doctrine of equality regardless of race was a cornerstone of the Sunni movement in the Maghreb, and also of the Maliki school of law as developed in Kairouan. These principles formed the core of the hostility of Afriqiya toward rule from the east by the Caliph. As recompense, the Aghlabid rulers saw that mosques were constructed or augmented, for example, at Tunis, at Kairouan, and at Sfax. Also a well-known ribat or fortified monastery was built at Monastir, and at Susa. Here Islamic warriors trained. In 831 the son of Ibrahim, Ziyad al-I, launched an invasion of Sicily. Placed in command was Azad ibn al-Firat, the Qadi or religious judge. The military adventure was termed a jihad. This expedition proved successful. Palermo was made the capital of the region captured. Later raids were made against the Italian peninsula. In 846 Rome was attacked and the Basilica of St. Peter sacked. In orchestrating the invasion of Sicily, the Aghlabid rulers had managed to unite two rebellious factions in a common effort against outsiders. Later Islamic rulers in Sicily severed connections with Afriqiya, and their own Sicilian Kalbid dynasty governed the emirate. The invasion of Sicily had worked to stabilize the political order in Afriqiya, which progressed in relative tranquility during its middle period. In its final decline, however, the dynasty self-destructed, when its 11th and last emir, Ziyad al-Allah III, due to insecurity stemming from his father's assassination, ordered his rival brothers and uncles executed. This occurred during the assaults made by the Fatimids against the Aghlabid domains. Institutions and society. In the Aghlabid government generally, the high positions were filled by princes of the blood, whose loyalty could be relied on. The judicial post of Qadi of Kairouan was said to be given only to outstanding personalities notable for their conscientiousness even more than their knowledge. On the other hand, the administrative staffs were composed of dependent clients, and the local bilingual Afariq. The Islamic State in Afriqiya paralleled in many respects the government structure formed in Abbasid Baghdad. There was the vizier, the hajib, the sahib al-barid, and numerous kutab. Leading Jews formed a small elite group. As in earlier periods, the majority of the population consisted of rural Berbers, distrusted now because of Kharajite or similar tendencies. Kairouan had become the cultural center of not only of Afriqiya but of the entire Maghreb. A type of volume then current, the Tabaqat, indirectly illuminates elite life in Aghlabid Afriqiya. One such work was the Tabaqat Ulama Afriqiya written by Abu al-Arab. Among the Sunni Muslim ulama, two learned professions then came to the fore, the faqih or the jurist, and the abid or the ascetics. The fuqaha congregated at Kairouan, then the legal center of al-Maghreb. The more liberal Hanafi school of law at first predominated in Afriqiya, but soon a strict form of the Maliki school came to prevail, becoming in fact the only widespread madhab, not only in Tunisia but throughout northwest Africa, a situation which continues to be the norm today. The Maliki school was introduced to Afriqiya by the jurist Azad ibn al-Furat, who nonetheless wavered between these two schools of law. The Mudawwana, written by his disciple Sanan, provided a vulgate of North African Malikism during the period in which this madhab won the field against its rival, the Hanafi. Abu Hanifa drew out fiqh was perhaps better suited to its origin in Baghdad, the sophisticated imperial capital. Malik ibn Anas initiated the school bearing his name in Medina. By choosing the Maliki school, Afriqiya obtained more discretion in defining its legal culture. The Maliki jurists were often at odds with the Aqlaybids, for example, over their personal immorality, and over issues of taxation regarding agriculture. Also, the Maliki fuqaha was understood to act in the interests of the Berbers for a local autonomy, by filtering out potential intrusions into Afriqiya by Arab power and influence from the east. Foremost of the Abid scholars or ascetics was Bulbi Rashid, who reputedly despised money and refused the post of grand judge. His fame spread throughout the Islamic world. By virtue of their piety and independence, the Abid won social prestige and a voice in politics, speaking especially for the cities, criticizing the regime's finance and trade decisions. Although substantially different, the status of the Abid relates somewhat to the much later figure of the Maribi saint, the Wali, who as keeper of Baraka became the object of veneration by religious believers, and whose tomb would be the destination of pilgrimage. Afriqiya flourished under Aqlaybid rule. Extensive improvements were made to the pre-existing water works in order to promote olive groves and other agriculture, to irrigate the royal gardens, and for livestock. Roman aqueducts to supply the towns with water were rebuilt under Abu Ibrahim Ahmad, the sixth emir. In the Kairouan region, hundreds of basins were constructed to store water for the raising of horses. Commercial trade resumed under the new Islamic regime, for example, by sea, particularly to the east with the Egyptian port of Alexandria. Also, improved trade routes linked Afriqiya with the continental interior, the Sahara and the Sudan, regions regularly incorporated into the Mediterranean commerce for the first time during this period. Evidently, camels on a large scale had not been common to the region until the 4th century, and it was not until several centuries later that their use in the Saharan trade became generally recognized. The trade began in earnest. The desert city of Shijil Masa near the Atlas Mountains in the far west served as one of the primary trading junctions and entrepot, for example, for salt and gold. Yet Warkla was the primary desert link to Gafsa and Kairouan. Also Ghadames, Gaut, and Tuat served the Saharan trade to Afriqiya. A prosperous economy permitted a refined and luxurious court life in the construction of the new palace cities of Al-Abbasiyah and Raqqata for the residences of the ruling emir. The architecture was later imitated in Fez, Plunken, and Bougie. The location of these Aqlaybid government centers was outside of Kairouan, a city dominated by Muslim clerical institutions. Afriqiya during the era under the Aqlaybid dynasty for the most part continued its leading role in the Maghreb, due generally to its peace and stability, recognized cultural achievements, and material prosperity. Fatimids, Shia Caliphate, and the Zirids. As the Fatimids grew in strength and numbers nearby to the west, they began to launch frequent attacks on the Aqlaybid regime in Afriqiya, which of course contributed to its political instability and general unrest. The Fatimids eventually managed to capture Kairouan in 909, forcing the last of the Aqlaybid line, Ziyadat Allah III, to evacuate the palace at Raqqata. On the east coast of Afriqiya facing Egypt, the Fatimids built a new capital on top of ancient ruins, calling the seaport Majia after their Mahdi. Maribi origin of the Fatimids. The Fatimid movement had originated locally in Al-Maghrib, among the Khatamah Berbers in Kabylia. However, both founders of the movement were recent immigrants from the Islamic East, religious dissidents, Abu Abdullah Ash-Shi, originally from Sana'a in Al-Yemen, and, coming from Salamiya in Syria, Ubayd al-Sa'id. Their religious affiliation was the Ismaili branch of the Shia. By agreement, the first founder to arrive was Abu Abdullah, the Ismaili dai or propagandist, who found welcome in the hostility against the caliphate in Baghdad freely expressed by the Khatamah Berbers. After his success in recruitment and in building the organization, Abu Abdullah was ready in 902 to send for Ubayd al-Sa'id, who arrived in 910, proclaimed himself Mahdi, and took control of the movement. Abu Abdullah was killed in a dispute over leadership. From the start, the Mahdi was focused on expansion eastward, and he soon attacked Egypt with a Fatimid army of Khatama Berbers led by his son, once in 914, and again in 919, both times quickly taking Alexandria but then losing to the Abbasids. Probing for weakness, the Mahdi then sent an invasion westward, but his forces met with mixed results. Many Sunnis, including the Umayyad Caliph of Al-Andalus and the Zenata Berber Kingdom in Morocco, effectively opposed him because of his Ismaili Shia affiliation. The Mahdi did not follow Maliki law, but taxed harshly, incurring further resentment. His capital Medjerda was more a fort than a princely city. The Maghreb was disrupted, being contested between the Zenata and the Sanaja favoring the Fatimids. After the death of the Mahdi, there came the Kharijite revolt of 935, which under Abu Yazid was said by 943 to be spreading chaos far and wide. The Mahdi's son, the Fatimid Caliph al-Qam, became besieged in Medjerda. Eventually Abu Yazid was defeated by the next Fatimid Caliph, Ismail, who then moved his residence to Kairouan. Fatimid rule continued to be under attack from Sunni Islamic states to the west, for example, the Umayyad Caliphate in al-Andalus. In 969 the Fatimid Caliph al-Mu'izz sent his best general Jawhar al-Rumi leading a Khatama Berber army against Egypt. He managed the conquest without great difficulty. The Shia Fatimids founded al-Qahira. In 970 the Fatimids also founded the world-famous Al-Azhar Mosque, which later became the leading Sunni theological center. 3 years later al-Mu'izz the Caliph left Africa for Egypt, taking everything, his treasures, his administrative staff, and the coffins of his predecessors. Once centered in Egypt, the Fatimids expanded their possessions further, northeast to Syria and southeast to Mecca, while retaining control of northwest Africa. From Cairo they were to enjoy relative success, they never returned to Africa. Zirid succession. After removing their capital to Cairo, the Fatimids withdrew from direct governance of al-Maghreb, which they delegated to a local vassal, namely Bulagan ibn Syria Sanaja Berber of the central Maghreb. As a result of civil war following his death, the Fatimid vassalage split in two, for Africa the Zirid, and for the western lands, the Hamidid. Civic security was chronically poor, due to political quarrels between the Zirids and the Hamidids, and attacks from Sunni states to the west. Although the Maghreb remained submerged in political confusion, at first the Fatimid province of Africa continued relatively prosperous under the Zirids. Soon, however, the Saharan trade began to decline, caused by changing consumer demand, as well as by encroachments by rival traders from the Fatimids to the east and from the rising power of the al-Murabit movement to the west. This decline in the Saharan trade caused a rapid deterioration to the city of Kairouan, the political and cultural center of the Zirid state. To compensate, the Zirids encouraged the commerce of their coastal cities, which did begin to quicken. However, they faced tough challenges from Mediterranean traders of the rising city-states of Genoa and Pisa. In 1048, for economic and popular reasons, the Zirids dramatically broke with the Shia Fatimid suzerainty from Cairo. Instead, the Zirids chose to become Sunni and declaring their allegiance to the Abbasid Caliphate of Baghdad. Many Shia were killed in disturbances throughout Africa. The Zirid state seized Fatimid coinage. Sunni Maliki jurists were re-established as the prevailing school of law. In retaliation, the Fatimids sent against the Zirids an invasion of nomadic Arabians who had already migrated into Egypt. These Bedouins were induced by the Fatimids to continue westward into Africa. The arriving Bedouins of the Banu Hilal defeated in battle Zirid and Hamidid armies and sacked Kairouan in 1057. It has been said that much of the Maghreb's misfortunes to follow could be traced to the chaos and regression occasioned by their arrival, although opinion is not unanimous. In Arab lore, Abu Zaid al-Hilali, the leader of the Banu Hilal, is a hero, as in the folk epic Taghribat Bani Hilal. The Banu Hilal originated from the tribal confederacy of the Banu Amir, located generally in southwest Arabia. As the Banu Hilali tribes took control of the plains, the local sedentary people were forced to take refuge in the mountains. In prosperous central and northern Africa, farming gave way to pastoralism. Even after the fall of the Zirids, the Banu Hilal were a source of disorder, as in the 1184 insurrection of the Banu Ghaniya. These rough Arab newcomers did constitute a second large Arab immigration into Africa, and accelerated the process of Arabization, with the Berber languages decreasing in use in rural areas as a result of this Bedouin ascendancy. Substantially weakened, the Zirids lingered on, while the regional economy declined, with civil society adrift. Perspectives and trends. The Fatimids were Shia, whose leadership came from the then unpopular East. Today, of course, the majority of Tunisians now identify as members of the opposing Sunni. The Fatimids did initially inspire the allegiance of Berber elements. Yet once installed Fatimid rule greatly disrupted social harmony in Africa. They imposed high, unorthodox taxes, leading to the Kharijite revolt. Later, the Fatimids relocated to Cairo. Although originally a client of the Fatimid Shia Caliphate in Egypt, eventually the Zirids expelled the Fatimids from Africa. In return, the Fatimids managed to send the destructive Banu Halal to Africa, which led to chaotic, ragged social conditions, during a period of economic decline. The Zirid dynasty has been viewed historically as a Berber kingdom, essentially founded by a Sanaja Berber leader. Also, from the far west of al-Maghrib, the Sunni Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba long opposed and battled against the Shia Fatimids, whether based in Africa or in Egypt. Accordingly, Tunisians may evidence faint pride in the great extent and relative endurance, the peace and prosperity at Fatimid rule brought to Egypt, and in the Fatimid Caliphate in Islamic history. During the interval of Shia rule, the Berber people appear to have moved ideologically, from a popular antagonism to the Sunni East, toward an acquiescence to its orthodoxy, though of course mediated by their own Maliki law. In addition to the above grievances against the Fatimids, during the Fatimid era the prestige of exercising cultural leadership within al-Maghrib shifted decisively away from Africa and instead came to be the prize of al-Andalus. Norman Africa. Anarchy in Africa made it a target for the Norman kingdom in Sicily, which between 1134 and 1148 seized Mahdia, Gabes, Sfax, and the island of Djerba. The Kingdom of Africa was an extension of the frontier zone of the Siculo-Norman state in the former Roman province of Africa, corresponding to Tunisia and parts of Algeria and Libya today. The main primary sources for the kingdom are Arabic, the Latin sources are scanter. According to Hubert Huben, since Africa was never mentioned in the royal title of the kings of Sicily, one ought not to speak of a Norman kingdom of Africa. Rather, really amounted to a constellation of Norman-held towns along coastal Africa. The Sicilian conquest of Africa began under Roger II in 1146–48. Sicilian rule consisted of military garrisons in the major towns, exactions on the local Muslim population, protection of Christians and the minting of coin. The local aristocracy was largely left in place, and Muslim princes controlled the civil government under Sicilian oversight. Economic connections between Sicily and Africa, which were strong before the conquest, were strengthened, while ties between Africa and northern Italy were expanded. Early in the reign of William I, the Kingdom of Africa fell to the Almohads. Its most enduring legacy was the realignment of Mediterranean powers brought about by its demise and the Siculo-Almohad peace finalized in 1180. Conquest of Tripoli and Mahdia. In 1142, Roger II attacked Tripoli, further south down the coast from Mahdia. In 1146 he besieged it and took it. The city had already been depleted by a series of famines and was practically in a state of civil war when Roger's troops assaulted it. It was still an important port on the sea route from the Maghreb to Egypt. Several of the minor emirs in the vicinity of Tripoli sought Sicilian overlordship after this. Yusuf, the ruler of Gabes, wrote to Roger requesting the robes and letter of appointment making me Wali of Gabes, and I shall be your deputy there, as are the Banu Matru who hold Tripoli from you. Roger complied and Yusuf, in his new robes, read out the letter of appointment to an assemblage of notables. Gabes had long been an irritant to Mahdia, and al-Hassan of Mahdia attacked it and brought back Yusuf to Mahdia, and stoned him to death. It is possible that Roger's attack on Mahdia in 1148 was a response to this insubordination on the part of its emir, but Ibn al-Athir suggested that Roger was merely taking advantage of a famine in Africa, despite the fact that he had a treaty with al-Hassan until 1150. In June 1148 Roger sent his Admiral George of Antioch, a former Mahdian officer, against al-Hassan. Off the island of Pantelleria the Sicilian fleet encountered a Mahdia ship bearing some carrier pigeons. George had the birds sent home with false messages that the fleet was headed for Byzantium. When the Sicilians reached Mahdia on 22nd of June, the emir and his court fled the unprepared city, leaving their treasure behind. This was seized as booty, but the Sicilians were given only 2 hours to plunder the city while its Muslim inhabitants took refuge in Christian homes and churches. Roger quickly issued a royal protection, or aman, to all the city's inhabitants. According to Ibn Abi Dinar, George restored both cities of Zawiya and Mahdia, lent money to the merchants, gave alms to the poor, placed the administration of justice in the hands of Qadi acceptable to the population, and arranged well the government of these 2 cities. Food was released to encourage refugees to return. On 1st of July the city of Susa, ruled by al-Hasan's son Ali, surrendered without a fight, and Ali fled to his father in Almohad, Morocco. On 12th of July Sfax fell after a short resistance. The Africans were treated humanely and an aman full of fine promises was granted for the entire province, according to Ibn al-Athir. Ibn Khaldun, in his Kitab al-Abr, records the abuse the Christians of Sfax heaped on their Muslim neighbors. The Banu Matru were left in power in Tripoli, and in Sfax Roger appointed Umar ibn al-Hussein al-Furiani, whose father was brought to Sicily as a hostage for his son's good behavior. The Arabic sources are unanimous in presenting Umar's father as encouraging his son to rebel nonetheless. The town of Barasht and the Isles of Kirkena fell to Roger, as did the unruly desert tribes. After the brief period of conquest and acquisition, the dominion of the Franks extended from Tripoli to the borders of Tunis, and from the western Maghreb to Qayrawan. Submission of Tunis and internal unrest. Roger became involved in a war with Byzantium after 1148, and so was unable to follow up his conquests with an attack on Tunis. In fear, the Tunisians sent grain to Sicily in hopes of averting an attack, according to Ibn Idari. This should probably be seen as tribute and submission, since Ibn Idhar writes that Roger was still in power in the city when the Almohads attacked it in 1159, although he was in fact dead. The Venetian chronicler Andrea Dandolo is probably correct in asserting, and the kings of Tunis paid him tribute. Roger died in 1154, and was succeeded by his son William I, who continued to rule Africa. His accession was taken for an opportunity by the native officials, who clamored for more powers to tax. The Arabic historians Ibn al-Athir and Ibn Khaldun both hoped that Roger would defend his African lands against Almohad extremism and intolerance. After his death, some Muslim officials demanded that sermons be preached against the Almohads in the mosques. Almohads. The only strong Muslim power then in the Maghreb was at the newly emerging Almohads, led by their caliph Berber Abd al-Mumin. He responded in several military campaigns which by 1160 compelled the Normans to retreat back to Sicily. The Almohads were also successful in driving off incursions by the Ayyubids in the 1180s, although they managed to occupy southern coastal areas intermittently during this period. Movement and Empire. The Almohad movement ruled variously in the Maghreb starting about 1130 until 1248. This movement had been founded by Ibn Tumart, a Mesmuda Berber from the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, who became the Mahdi. After a pilgrimage to Mecca followed by study, he had returned to the Maghreb about 1218 inspired by the teachings of al-Ash'ari and al-Ghazali. A charismatic leader, he preached an interior awareness of the unity of God. A Puritan and a hard-edged reformer, he gathered a strict following among the Berbers in the Atlas, founded a radical community, and eventually began an armed challenge to the current rulers, the Almoravids. These Almoravids had also been a Berber Islamic movement of the Maghreb, which had run its course and since become decadent and weak. Although the Almoravids had once ruled from Mauritania to Al-Andalus, Almoravid rule had never reached to Afriqiya. Following Ibn Tumart's death, Abd al-Mumin al-Kumi became the Almohad Caliph, circa 1130. Abd al-Mumin had been one of the original 10 followers of Ibn Tumart. He immediately had attacked the ruling Almoravids and had wrestled Morocco away from them by 1147, suppressing subsequent revolts there. Then he crossed the straits, occupying Al-Andalus. In 1152 he successfully invaded the Hamidids of Bougie. His armies intervened in Zirid Afriqiya, removing the Christian Sicilians by 1160. Yet Italian merchants from Genoa and Pisa had already arrived, continuing the foreign presence. Abd al-Mumin briefly presided over a unified Northwest African empire, the first and last in its history under indigenous rule. It would be the high point of Maghribi political unity. Yet 20 years later, by 1184, the revolt by the Banu Ghaniya had spread from the Balearic Islands to Afriqiya, causing problems for the Almohad regime for the next 50 years. Rule of the Maghreb. Ibn Tumart, the Almohad founder, left writings in which his theological ideas mix with the political. Therein he claimed that the leader, the Mahdi, is infallible. Ibn Tumart created a hierarchy from among his followers which persisted long after the Almohad era, based not only on a species of ethnic loyalty, such as the Council of 50, and the Assembly of 70, but more significantly based on a formal structure for an inner circle of governance that would transcend tribal loyalties, namely, his al-Alder or people of the house, a sort of privy council, his al-Ashra or the 10, originally composed of his first 10 followers, and a variety of offices. Ibn Tumart trained his own talaba or ideologists, as well as his Hufas, whose function was both religious and military. There is lack of certainty about some details, but general agreement that Ibn Tumart sought to reduce the influence of the traditional tribal framework. Later historical developments were greatly facilitated by his original reorganization because it made possible collaboration among tribes not likely to otherwise coalesce. These organizing and group solidarity preparations made by Ibn Tumart were most methodical and efficient, and a conscious replica of the Medina period of the Prophet Muhammad. The Mahdi Ibn Tumart also had championed the idea of strict Islamic law and morals displacing unorthodox aspects of Berber custom. At his early base at Tinmul, Ibn Tumart functioned as the custodian of the faith, the arbiter of moral questions, and the chief judge. Yet because of the narrow legalism then common among Maliki jurists and because of their influence in the Almoravid regime, Ibn Tumart did not favor the Maliki school of law, nor did he favor any of the four recognized madhabs. In practice, however, the Maliki school of law survived and by default eventually functioned in an official fashion who was loyal to Ibn Tumart's teachings. After a century of oscillation, the Caliph Abu al-Ala Idris al-Mamun broke with the narrow ideology of prior Almohad regimes that had continued to function on and off, and for the most part, at the end, poorly. Circa 1230, he affirmed the reinstitution of the then reviving Malikite rite, perennially popular in al-Maghreb. The Muslim philosophers Ibn Tufail of Granada, and Ibn Rushd of Córdoba, who was also appointed a Maliki judge, were dignitaries known to the Almohad court, whose capital became fixed at Marrakesh. The Sufi master theologian Ibn Arabi was born in Murcia in 1165. Under the Almohads, architecture flourished, the Giralda being built in Seville and the pointed arch being introduced. There is no better indication of the importance of the Almohad Empire than the fascination it has exerted on all subsequent rulers in the Maghreb. It was an empire Berber in its inspiration, and whose imperial fortunes were under the direction of Berber leaders. The Unitarian Almohads had gradually modified the original ambition of strictly implementing their founders' designs. In this way the Almohads were similar to the preceding Almoravids. Yet their movement probably worked to deepen the religious awareness of the Muslim people across the Maghreb. Nonetheless, it could not suppress other traditions and teachings, and alternative expressions of Islam, including the popular cult of saints, the Sufis, as well as the Maliki jurists, survived. The Almohad Empire eventually weakened and dissolved. Except for the Muslim kingdom of Granada, Spain was lost. In Morocco, the Almohads were to be followed by the Marinids, in Afriqiya, by the Fsids. Hussainid dynasty of Tunis. The Hussainid dynasty succeeded Almohad rule in Afriqiya, with the Fsids claiming to represent the true spiritual heritage of its founder, the Mahdi ibn Tumart. Under the Fsids, Tunisia would eventually regain for a time cultural primacy in the Maghreb. Political chronology. Abu Hafs Umar Inti was one of the 10, the crucial early adherents of the Almohad movement, circa 1121. These 10 were companions of Ibn Tumart the Mahdi, and formed an inner circle consulted on all important matters. Abu Hafs Umar Inti, wounded in battle near Marrakesh in 1130, was for a long time a powerful figure within the Almohad movement. His son Umar al-Hintati was appointed by the Almohad Caliph Muhammad in Nasir as governor of Afriqiya in 1207 and served until his death in 1221. His son, the grandson of Abu Hafs, was Abu Zakaria. Abu Zakaria served the Almohads in Afriqiya as governor of Gebes, then in 1226 as governor of Tunis. In 1229, during disturbances within the Almohad movement, Abu Zakaria declared his independence, hence, the start of the Hussainid dynasty. In the next few years he secured his hold on the cities of Afriqiya, then captured Tripolitania to the east, and Algiers to the west, and later added Tlemcen. He solidified his rule among the Berber confederacies. Government structure of the Hussainid state followed the Almohad model, a rather strict centralization. Abu Zakaria's succession to the Almohads was briefly acknowledged in Friday prayer by several states in Al-Andalus and in Morocco. Diplomatic relations were opened with Venice, Genoa, Sicily, and Aragon. Abu Zakaria became the foremost ruler in the Maghreb. For an historic moment, the son of Abu Zakaria and self-declared Caliph of the Hafsids, al-Mustansir, was recognized as Caliph by Mecca and the Islamic world, following termination of the Abbasid Caliphate by the Mongols. At the moment passed, the Hafsids remained the local sovereignty. In 1270 King Louis IX of France, whose brother was the King of Sicily, landed an army near Tunis. Disease devastated their camp. Later, Hussainid influence was reduced by the rise of the Moroccan Marinids of Fez, who captured and lost Tunis twice. Yet Hussainid fortunes would recover, two notable rulers being Abu Faris and his grandson Abu Amr Uthman. Toward the end, internal disarray within the Hussainid dynasty created vulnerabilities, while a great power struggle arose between Spaniard and Turk over control of the Mediterranean. The Hussainid dynasts became pawns, subject to the rival strategies of the combatants. By 1574 Afriqiya had been incorporated into the Ottoman Empire. Commerce and trade. The entire Maghreb, as well as Tunisia under the early Hafsids, enjoyed an era of prosperity due to the rise of Saharan Sudanese as well as the Mediterranean trade, the latter including trade with Europe. Across the region, repeated buy and sell dealings with Christians led to the development of practices and structured arrangements that were crafted to ensure security, customs revenue, and commercial profit. The principal customs ports were then Tunis, Sfax, Mahdia, Djerba, and Gebes, Oran, Bougie, and Bone, and Tripoli. Generally at such ports, the imports were offloaded and transferred to a customs area from where they were deposited in a sealed warehouse, or fundic, until the duties and fees were paid. The Tunis Customs Service was a stratified bureaucracy. At its head was often a member of the ruling nobility or musharraf, called al-Qaid, who not only managed the staff collecting duties but also might negotiate commercial agreements, conclude treaties, and would act as judge in legal disputes involving foreigners. The amount of the duties varied, usually 5 or 10%. It was possible for an arriving ship to deliver its goods and pick up the return cargo in several days' time. Christian merchants of the Mediterranean, usually organized by their city of origin, set up and maintained their own trading facilities in these North African customs ports to handle the flow of merchandise and marketing. Islamic law during this era had developed a specific institution to regulate community morals, or hisbah, which included the order and security of public markets, the supervision of market transactions, and related matters. The urban marketplace was generally a street of shops selling the same or similar commodities. The city official charged with these responsibilities was called the mutasib. In effecting public order in the urban markets, the mutasib enforced fair commercial dealing, keeping roadways open, regulating the safety of building construction, ensuring the metal value of existing coinage and minting new coin. Authority of the mutasib, with his group of assistants, was somewhere between a qadi and the police, or on other occasions perhaps between a public prosecutor or trade commissioner and the mayor or a high city official. Often a leading judge or mufti held the position. The mutasib did not hear contested litigation, but nonetheless could order the pain and humiliation of up to 40 lashes, remand to debtor's prison, order a shop closed, and expel from the city. The authority of the mutasib did not extend into the countryside. During this period from Al-Andalus came Muslim and Jewish immigrants with appreciated talents, for example, trade connections, crafts, and agricultural techniques. Regarding general prosperity, however, there was a sharp economic decline starting in the 14th century due to a variety of factors. Later, Mediterranean trade gave way to corsair raiding activity. In progress. Society and culture. As a result of the initial prosperity, Al-Mustansir transformed his capital Tunis, constructing a palace and the Abu Fire Park. He also created an estate near Bizerte. An unfortunate divide, however, developed between the governance of the cities and of the countryside. At times the city-based rulers would grant rural tribes autonomy in exchange for their support in intra-Maribi struggles. This tribal independence of the central authority meant also that when the center grew weak, the periphery might still remain strong and resilient. In progress. Bedouin Arabs continued to arrive into the 13th century. With their tribal ability to raid and war still intact, they remained influential. The Arab language came to be predominant, except for a few Berber-speaking areas, for example, Kharijit Jerba, and the Desert South. Also, Arab, Muslim and Jewish migration continued to come into Afriqiya from Al-Andalus, especially after the fall of Granada in 1492, the last Muslim state ruling on the Iberian Peninsula. These newly arriving immigrants brought infusions of the developed arts of Al-Andalus. The Andalusian tradition of music and poetry was discussed by Ahmad al-Tafashi of Tunis, in his Mutat al-Asma fi Ilma al-Sama, in volume 41 of his encyclopedia. After a hiatus under the Almohads, the Maliki school of law resumed its full traditional jurisdiction over the Maghreb. During the 13th century, the Maliki school had undergone substantial liberalizing changes due in part to Iraqi influence. Under Hafsid jurisprudence, the concept of maslaha or public interest developed in the operation of their madhab. This opened up Maliki fiqh to considerations of necessity and circumstance with regard to the general welfare of the community. By this means, local custom was admitted in the Sharia of Malik, to become an integral part of the legal discipline. Later, the Maliki theologian Muhammad ibn Arafa of Tunis studied at the Zayatuna Library, said to contain 60,000 volumes. Education was improved by the institution of a system of madrasa. Sufism, for example, Sidi bin Arus, founder of the Arusiyya Tariqa, became increasingly established, linking city and countryside. Poetry blossomed, as did architecture. For the moment, Tunisia had regained cultural leadership of the Maghreb. Ibn Khaldun. A major social philosopher, Ibn Khaldun is recognized as a pioneer in sociology, historiography, and related disciplines. Although having Yemeni ancestry, his family enjoyed centuries-long residency in Al-Andalus before leaving in the 13th century for Afriqiya. As a native of Tunis, he spent much of his life under the Hafsids, whose regime he served on occasion. Ibn Khaldun entered into a political career early on, working under a succession of different rulers of small states, whose designs unfolded amid shifting rivalries and alliances. At one point he rose to vizier, however, he also spent a year in prison. His career required several relocations, for example, Fez, Granada, eventually Cairo, where he died. In order to write, he retired for a while from active political life. Later, after his pilgrimage to Mecca, he served as Grand Qadi of the Maliki Rite in Egypt. While he was visiting Damascus, Tamerlane took the city. The conqueror interviewed the elderly jurist and social philosopher, yet Ibn Khaldun managed to escape back to his life in Egypt. The history and historiography written by Ibn Khaldun was informed in theory by his learning as a Falasuf. Yet it was his participation in the small unstable governments of the region that inspired many of his key insights. His history seeks to account for the apparent cyclical progression of historical states of the Maghreb, whereby a new ruling association comes to power with strong loyalties, which over the course of several generations fall apart, leading to the collapse of the ruling strata. The social cohesion necessary for the group's initial rise to power, and for the group's ability to maintain it and exercise it, Ibn Khaldun called Asabiyya. His 7-volume Kitab al-Abr is a telescoped universal history, which concentrates on the Persian, Arab, and Berber civilizations. Its lengthy prologue, called the Muqaddimah, presents the development of long-term political trends and events as a field for the study, characterizing them as human phenomena, in quasi-sociological terms. It is widely considered to be a gem of sustained cultural analysis. Due to his downplaying the role of the ethnic Arab people in the development of Islamic science, philosophy and politics, Ibn Khaldun did not attract sufficient interest among Arabs, his studies being neglected in Afriqiya, a trend that has lasted to the present day as his works are considered politically incorrect vis-à-vis Arab nationalism. However, and naturally, in the Persian and Turkish worlds he acquired a sustained following. In the later books of the Kitab al-Ibar, he focuses especially on the history of the Berbers of the Maghreb. The perceptive Ibn Khaldun in his narration eventually arrives at historical events he himself witnessed or encountered. As an official of the Husaynids, Ibn Khaldun experienced firsthand the effects on the social structure of troubled regimes and the long-term decline in the region's fortunes. Ottoman Caliphate, and the Beys. A long-term contest for the Mediterranean began in the 16th century, between Spaniards and Turks. Spain then occupied a series of ports in northwest Africa, for example, Oran, Tripoli, Tunis. Some Muslim rulers encouraged Turkish forces to enter the area in order to counter the Spanish presence. The Husaynids of Tunis, however, saw in the Muslim Turks a greater threat and arranged a Spanish alliance. The Ottoman Empire accepted many corsairs as their agents, who made Algiers their base, including Khair al-Din and his brother Arouj, and Al-Yajali. In 1551 the corsair Dragut was installed in Tripoli. He entered Kairouan in 1558. Then in 1569 Al-Yajali, advancing from Algiers, seized Tunis. After the Christian naval victory at Lepanto in 1571, Don Juan of Austria retook Tunis for Spain in 1573. Al-Yajali returned in 1574 with a large fleet and army to capture Tunis with finality, and then sent the last Hafsid to Constantinople. Janissaries. Following imposition in 1574 of permanent Ottoman imperial rule, government in Tunisia was put on a more stable footing after a long period of flux and chaos. The Porte in Constantinople appointed a pasha as the civil and military authority in Tunisia, which was made a province of the empire. Turkish became the language of the state. The capital city of Tunis was originally garrisoned with 4,000 Janissaries, recruited primarily from Anatolia, commanded by an aga. The Porte did not maintain the ranks of Janissaries, rather the pasha in Tunisia himself began to recruit such soldiery from many different regions. From 1574 to 1591 a council, composed of senior military and local notables, advised the provincial government. The new energy of Turkish rule was welcome in Tunis, and by the ulama. Although the Ottomans preferred the Hanafi school of law, some Tunisian Maliki jurists were admitted into the administration. Yet the rule remained one of a foreign elite. In the countryside, efficient Turkish troops managed to control the tribes without compromising alliances, but their rule was unpopular. The rural economy was never brought under effective regulation by the central authority. For revenues the government continued to rely primarily on corsair raiding in the Mediterranean. In 1591 Janissary junior officers who were not of Turkish origin forced the pasha to acknowledge the authority of one of their own men, called the Dey. Relatively independent of the Ottomans, the Dey exercised control in the cities. Uthman Dey and Yusuf Dey managed well enough to establish peace and order in place of chronic social turbulence. In the tribal rural areas, control and collection of taxes were assigned to a chieftain, called the Bey. Twice a year, armed expeditions patrolled the countryside, showing the arm of the central authority. As an auxiliary force, the Beys organized rural cavalry, mostly Arab, recruited from what came to be called the government tribes. Muradid Beys. The Corsican Murad Corso had since his youth been sponsored by Ramdan Bey. Murad then followed his benefactor into the office of the Bey, which he exercised effectively. Later he was also named Pasha, although his position remained inferior to the Dey. His son Hamuda inherited both titles, with the support of the local notables of Tunis. By virtue of his title as Pasha, the Bey came to enjoy the prestige of connection with the Sultan Caliph in Constantinople. In 1640, upon the death of the Dey, Hamuda Bey maneuvered to establish his control over appointments to that office. Under Murad II Bey, son of Hamuda, the Divan again functioned as a council of notables. Yet in 1673 the Janissaries, seeing their power ebbing, rose in revolt. During the consequent fighting, the urban forces of the Janissaries fought against the Muradid Beys with their largely rural forces under the tribal sheikhs, and with popular support from city notables. As the Beys secured victory, so did the rural Bedouins and the Tunisian notables, who also emerged triumphant. The Arabic language returned to local official use, although the Muradids continued to use Turkish in the central government, accentuating their elite status and Ottoman connection. At Murad II Bey's death, internal discord with the Muradid family led to armed struggle. The Turkish rulers of Algeria later intervened on behalf of one side in a subsequent domestic conflict. The Algerian forces did not withdraw and proved unpopular. This unfortunate condition of civil discord and Algerian interference persisted. The last Medjerda Bey was assassinated in 1702 by Ibrahim Sharif, who then ruled for several years with Algerian backing. A gradual economic shift occurred during the Medjerda era, as corsair raiding decreased due to pressure from Europe, and commercial trading based on agricultural products increased due to an integration of the rural population into regional networks. Mediterranean trade, however, continued to be carried by European shipping concerns. The Beys, in order to derive the maximum advantage from the export trade, in addition to taxation, instituted government monopolies which mediated between the local producers and foreign merchants. As a result, the rulers and their business partners took a disproportionate share of Tunisia's trading profits. This precluded the development of local interests, whether rural landowners or a wealthy merchant strata. A social divide persisted, with the important families in Tunisia identified as a Turkish ruling caste. Hussainid Beys. The Hussainid Beys ruled from 1705 to 1881, and reigned until 1957. In theory, Tunisia continued as a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, but the Ottomans never were able to depend on, or exact, obedience. Hussein ibn Ali, a cavalry officer of Greek Cretan origin, came into power in 1705, remaining in control until 1735. He had won backing from the Tunisian ulama and notables, as well as from the tribes, for his opposition to Algerian influence, which was removed. Yet in a succession dispute, his nephew Ali and his son Muhammad fought a divisive civil war, which ended in 1740 with Ali's uncertain victory. This result was reversed in 1756 after 10 more years of fighting, but not without meddling by Algeria. Early Hussainid policy required a careful balance among several divergent parties: the Ottomans, the Turkish-speaking elite in Tunisia, and local Tunisians, both urban and rural, notables and clerics, landowners and the more remote tribes. Entanglement with the Ottoman Empire was avoided due to its potential ability to take over the Beys' prerogatives. However, religious ties to the Caliph were fostered, adding prestige to the Beys and winning approval of the local ulama and deference from the notables. Janissaries were still recruited, but increasing reliance was placed on tribal forces. Turkish was spoken at the apex, but use of Arabic increased in government use. Khalifless and native Tunisians notables were given increased admittance into higher positions and deliberations. Yet the Hussainid Beys did not themselves intermarry with Tunisians. Instead, they often turned to the institution of Mamluks. The dynasty never ceased to identify as Ottoman, and therefore privileged. Nonetheless, the local ulama were courted, with funding for religious education, and the clerics. Maliki jurists entered government service. Rural marabouts were mollified. Tribal sheikhs were recognized and invited to conferences. Especially favored were a handful of prominent families, Turkish-speaking, who were given business and land opportunities, as well as important posts in the government, depending on their loyalty. The French Revolution and reactions to it caused disruptions in European economic activity, which provided opportunities for Tunisia to profit handsomely. Hamada Pasha was bey during this period of prosperity. He also turned back an Algerian invasion in 1807, and quelled a Janissary revolt in 1811. After the Congress of Vienna in 1815, Britain and France secured the Beys' agreement to cease sponsoring or permitting corsair raids, which had resumed during the Napoleonic conflict. Then in the 1820s, economic activity in Tunisia took a steep downturn. The Tunisian government was particularly affected due to its monopoly positions regarding many exports. Credit was obtained to weather the deficits, but eventually the debt would grow to unmanageable levels. Foreign business interests increasingly exercised control over domestic commerce. Foreign trade proved to be a Trojan horse. Under the French protectorate, the Hussainid Beys continued in a largely ceremonial role. Following independence, a republic was declared in 1957, the beylical office was terminated and the Hussainid dynasty came to an end. Era of reform. In the 19th century, under the Hussainid Beys, commerce with the Europeans increased, with permanent residences established by many foreign merchants. In 1819 the Bey agreed to quit corsair raids. In 1830 the Bey also agreed to enforce in Tunisia the capitulation treaties between the Ottomans and various European powers, under which European consuls would act as judges in legal cases involving their nationals. During 1830, the French royal army occupied neighboring Algeria. Ahmad Bey assumed the throne during this complex situation. Following the examples of the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mahmud II, and of Egypt under Muhammad Ali, he moved to intensify a program to update and upgrade the Tunisian armed forces. In pursuit of this policy, he instituted a military school and started industries in order to supply its more modern army and navy. In a major step, he initiated the recruitment and conscription of native Tunisians to serve in the army and navy, a step which would reduce the long division between the state and its citizens. Yet the resulting tax increases were not popular. Although desiring Ottoman support, repeatedly Ahmad Bey refused to apply in Tunisia the Ottoman legal reforms regarding citizen rights, i.e., the Tanzimat of 1839. Instead, he instituted progressive laws of his own, showing native Tunisian authority in the modernizing project and hence the redundancy of importing any Ottoman reforms. The slave trade was abolished in 1841, slavery in 1846. Yet these legal reforms had limited application to many Tunisians. Ahmad Bey continued the general Beylical policy, i.e., to decline or reject political attachment to the Ottoman state, but welcome religious ties to the Ottoman Caliphate. As part of his maneuvering to maintain Tunisia's sovereignty, Ahmad Bey sent 4,000 Tunisian troops against the Russian Empire during the Crimean War. In doing so, he allied Tunisia with Turkey, France, and Britain. Modernity and the French Protectorate. As the 19th century commenced, the country remained quasi-autonomous, although officially still an Ottoman province. Trade with Europe increased dramatically, with Western merchants arriving to establish businesses in the country. In 1861, Tunisia enacted the first constitution in the Arab world, but a move toward a modernizing republic was hampered by the poor economy and by political unrest. Loans made by foreigners to the government were becoming difficult to manage. In 1869, Tunisia declared itself bankrupt. An international financial commission, with representatives from France, the United Kingdom, and Italy, took control over the economy. Initially, Italy was the country that demonstrated the most desire to have Tunisia as a colony, having investment, citizens and geographic proximity as motivation. However, this was rebuffed when Britain and France cooperated to prevent this during the years 1871 to 1878, ending in Britain supporting French influence in Tunisia in exchange for dominion over Cyprus. France still had the issue of Italian influence and thus decided to find an excuse for a preemptive strike. In the spring of 1881, the French army occupied Tunisia, claiming that Tunisian troops had crossed the border to Algeria, France's primary colony in northern Africa. Italy, also interested in Tunisia, protested, but did not risk a war with France. On May 12 of that year, Tunisia was officially made a French protectorate with the signature of the Treaty of Bardo by Mohammed III Asadiq. This gave France control of Tunisian governance and making it a de facto French protectorate. The French progressively assumed more of the important administrative positions, and by 1884 they supervised all Tunisian government bureaus dealing with finance, post, education, telegraph, public works and agriculture. They decided to guarantee the Tunisian debt, and then abolished the International Finance Commission. French settlements in the country were actively encouraged. The number of French colonists grew from 34,000 in 1906 to 144,000 in 1945, occupying approximately one-fifth of the cultivated land. Roads, ports, railroads, and mines were developed. In rural areas, the French administration strengthened the local officials and weakened the independent tribes. An additional judicial system was established for Europeans but available generally, set up without interfering with the existing Sharia courts, available as always for the legal matters of Tunisians. Many welcomed the progressive changes, but preferred to manage their own affairs. Khair al-Din in the 1860s and 1870s had introduced modernizing reforms before the French occupation. Some of his companions later founded the weekly magazine Al-Hadira in 1888. A more radical one, Al-Zahra, ran from 1890 until suppressed in 1896, as was the Sabil al-Rashad of Abd al-Aziz al-Thalabi, who was inspired by Muhammad Abd of Cairo, among others. Bashir Sfar initiated the discussion group called Ania in 1896. Ali Bash Hamba founded the French-language journal Tunisian to inform the French public of the Tunisian complaints, but only increased unrest. Thalabi founded the Arabic-language Tunisian in 1909, to challenge Hamba from a Tunisian viewpoint. In 1911 there were civil disturbances started within the universities. Hamba and Thalabi came together. A political party was begun, al-Ittihad al-Islami, which had pro-Ottoman leanings. Issues concerning a Muslim cemetery, the Jallas, sparked large demonstrations which ended with martial law and the killing of many Tunisians in late 1911. Further demonstrations in 1912 led to the closing of the nationalist newspapers and the exiling of nationalist leadership. Organized nationalist sentiment among Tunisians, driven underground in 1912, resurfaced after the Great War. Encouragement came from many directions, for example, the formation of the League of Nations in 1919. Nationalists established the Destour Party in 1920. Habib Bourguiba established and led its successor, the Neo-Destour Party, in 1934. French authorities later banned this new party, while the fascist organizations of the Tunisian Italians supported it. During World War II, the French authorities in Tunisia supported the Vichy government which ruled France after its capitulation to Germany in 1940. After initial victories to the east, the German general Erwin Rommel, lacking supplies and reinforcements, in 1942 lost the decisive Battle of El Alamein to the British General Bernard Montgomery. After learning of Allied landings in the west, the Axis army retreated westward to Tunisia and set up defensive positions. The British following on his heels eventually broke these lines, although Rommel did have some early success against the Green American troops advancing from the west, until the arrival of General George Patton who stopped Rommel in battle. The fighting ended in May 1943. The German Afrika Korps surrendered on May 11. 2 days later, on May 13, after the collapse of the 5th German Tank Army, the fall of Tunis and the surrounding of the 1st Italian Army, still holding the line at Infidaville, the Italian General Mess formally surrendered to the Allies. General Eisenhower stated it far from governing a conquered country, we were attempting only to force a gradual widening of the base of government, with the final objective of turning all internal affairs over to popular control. Tunisia became a staging area for operations in the invasion of Sicily later that year. After World War II, the struggle for national independence continued and intensified. The Neo-Destour Party re-emerged under Habib Bourguiba. Yet with a lack of progress, violent resistance to French rule began in the mountains during 1954. The Tunisians coordinated with independence movements in Algeria and Morocco, although it was Tunisia that first became independent. Ultimately, the Neo-Destour Party managed to gain sovereignty for its people by maneuver and finesse. Tunisian Republic. Independence from France was achieved on March 20, 1956. The state was established as a constitutional monarchy with the Bey of Tunis, Mohammed VIII al-Amin Bey, as the King of Tunisia. The era of Habib Bourguiba. In 1957, the Prime Minister Habib Bourguiba abolished the monarchy and firmly established his Neo-Destour Party. The regime sought to run a strictly structured regime with efficient and equitable state operations, but not democratic-style politics. Also terminated was the Bey, a quasi-monarchist institution dating back to Ottoman rule. Then Bourguiba commenced to dominate the country for the next 31 years, governing with thoughtful programs yielding stability and economic progress, repressing Islamic fundamentalism, and establishing rights for women unmatched by any other Arab nation. The vision that Bourguiba offered was of a Tunisian republic. The political culture would be secular, populist, and imbued with a kind of French rationalist vision of the state that was buoyant, touched with élan, Napoleonic in spirit. Bourguiba then saw an idiosyncratic, eclectic future combining tradition and innovation, Islam with a liberal prosperity. Bourguibism was also resolutely non-militarist, arguing that Tunisia could never be a credible military power and that the building of a large military establishment would only consume scarce investment resources and perhaps thrust Tunisia into the cycles of military intervention and politics that had plagued the rest of the Middle East. In the name of economic development, Bourguiba nationalized various religious land holdings and dismantled several religious institutions. Bourguiba's great asset was that Tunisia possessed a mature nationalist organization, the Neo-Destour Party, which on Independence Day held the nation's confidence in hand. It had made its case to the city workers in the modern economy and to country folk in the traditional economy. It had excellent leaders who commanded respect and who generally developed reasonable government programs. July 1961, when Tunisia imposed a blockade on the French naval base at Medjerda, hoping to force its evacuation, the crisis culminated in a three-day battle between French and Tunisian forces that left some 630 Tunisians and 24 French dead and eventually led to France ceding the city and naval base to Tunisia in 1963. One a serious rival to Habib Bourguiba was Salah ben Yusuf. Exiled in Cairo during the early 1950s, he had absorbed the pan-Arab nationalism associated with the Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser. Yet as a result of his strong opposition to the Neo-Destour leadership during their negotiations with France for autonomy prior to independence, Ben Yusuf was removed from his position as Secretary-General and expelled from the party. Nonetheless, he rallied disaffected union members, students, and others, enough to put 20,000 Yusufists into the street during the next Congress of the Neo-Destour party. Eventually he left Tunisia for Cairo. Socialism was not initially a major part of the Neo-Destour project, but the government had always held and implemented redistributive policies. A large public works program was launched in 1961. Nonetheless, in 1964, Tunisia entered a short-lived socialist era. The Neo-Destour party became the Socialist Destour, and the new Minister of Planning, Ahmed Ben Salah, formulated a state-led plan for agricultural cooperatives and public sector industrialization. The socialist experiment raised considerable opposition within Bourguiba's old coalition. Ahmed Ben Salah was eventually dismissed in 1970, and many socialized operations were returned to private ownership in the early 1970s. In 1978, a general strike was repressed by the government with its forces killing dozens. Union leaders were jailed. After independence, Tunisian economic policy had been primarily to promote light industry and tourism, and develop its phosphate deposits. The major sector remained agriculture with small farms prevailing, but these did not produce well. In the early 1960s the economy slowed down, but the socialist program did not prove to be the cure. In the 1970s the economy of Tunisia expanded at a very healthy rate. Oil was discovered, and tourism continued. City and countryside populations drew roughly equal in number. Yet agricultural problems and urban unemployment led to increased migration to Europe. The era of Ben Ali. In the 1980s the economy performed poorly. In 1983 the International Monetary Fund forced the government to raise the price of bread and semolina, causing severe hardship and protest riots. In this situation, the Islamic tendency movement under Sheikh Rached El Ghanouchi provided popular leadership. Civil disturbances, including those by the Islamists, were repressed by government security forces under General Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. The government persisted in following its program. Ben Ali was named Prime Minister. The 84-year-old President Bourguiba was overthrown and replaced by Ben Ali, his Prime Minister, on November 7, 1987. The new president changed very little in the Bourguiba's political support system, except to rename the party the Constitutional Democratic Rally. In 1988, Ben Ali tried a new tack with reference to the government and Islam, by attempting to reaffirm the country's Islamic identity. Several Islamist activists were released from prison. He also forged a national pact with the Tunisian party Harakat al-Ittijah al-Islami, which had been founded in 1981. Later it changed its name to Ennahda. But Ben Ali's innovative tack did not work out. Subsequently, Ennahda claimed to have run strongly in the 1989 elections, which gave the appearance of being unfair. Reports often described pro-government votes at over 90%. Ben Ali subsequently banned Islamist political parties and jailed as many as 8,000 activists. In 2004, Ben Ali was re-elected president for a 5-year term, with a reported 94.5% of the vote. Also elected were 189 members of the Majlis al-Nuwab or Chamber of Deputies, with a 5-year term. In addition, there was a Chamber of Advisors composed of 126 members with 6-year terms, of whom 85 were elected by government subdivisions, by professional associations, and by trade unions. The remaining 41 members were appointed by the president. The court system remained a combination of French civil law and Islamic Sharia law. A widely supported human rights movement emerged, which included not only Islamists but also trade unionists, lawyers and journalists. Tunisia's political institutions, however, remained fixed in the authoritarian past. As of 2001, the government's response to calls for reform included house arrests and prison. The government continued its refusal to recognize Muslim opposition parties, and governed the country in a political climate considered rigid, from time to time using objectionable military and police measures to repress dissent. In foreign affairs, Tunisia continued to enjoy close ties to the West while broadly following a moderate, non-aligned stance. The Arab League was headquartered in Tunis from 1979 to 1991. 2000s in Tunisia. Tunis, the capital, has a population of about 700,000, and the second city of Sfax approximately 250,000. The population growth rate measured as births per female has fallen from 7 to 2. Life expectancy is female 75, male 72. The religion is Muslim, with 1% Christian, and 1% Jewish and other. Required education is 8 years. The official language is Arabic, with French also spoken particularly in commercial dealings, and with less than 2% Berber. Literacy by definition includes all over 15 years, and is overall 74%, male 83% and female 65%. In 2006, 7.3 million mobile phones were in use and 1.3 million were on the Internet. There were 26 television stations and 29 radio stations. Over half the population is considered urban, with agricultural workers being about 30% of the total. Unemployment in 2000 was about 15.6%, and in 2006 about 13.9%. Over 300,000 Tunisians were reported to be residing in France during 1994. Left out of the recent prosperity were many rural and urban poor, including small businesses facing the world market. The monetary unit is the dinar, at about 1.33 per dollar USA, with inflation estimated pp. 4.5% for 2006. Tunisia's per capita annual income was approximately $8,900 in 2006. Between 1988 and 1998 the economy more than doubled. The economy grew at 5% per year during the 1990s, but hit a 15-year low of 1.9% in 2002, but it regained a 5% rate for 2003 to 2005. It was said to be 4% to 5% for 2006. Tunisia's economy is diverse. Its products are primarily from light industry and from agriculture: tomatoes, citrus, sugar beets, dates, almonds, figs, vegetables, grapes, beef dairy, as well as livestock and fishing. Other production comes from petroleum and mining. Tunisia is self-sufficient in oil, but not in natural gas. A very significant portion of the economy derives from the tourist industry. Gross domestic product was composed of approximately 12.5% agriculture, 33.1% industry, and 54.4% services. Exports went to France 29%, Italy 20%, Germany 9%, Spain 6%, Libya 5%, USA 4%. Imports came from France 25%, Italy 22%, Germany 10%, Spain 5%. An association agreement with the European Union will move Tunisia toward full free trade with the EU by 2008. The face of the countryside changes markedly as one moves from north to south. In the north and central coast, orchards and fields predominate, while in the central plains, pasturage. Overall, arable land is 17% to 19%, with forest and woodland 4%, permanent crops 13%, irrigated lands at 2.4%, about 20% is used for pasture. There are limited fresh water resources. In the south the environment grows increasingly arid, until the borderlands eventually reach into the Sahara Desert. Roads total about 20,000 kilometers, 2/3 being paved, with most of the unpaved roads lying in the desert south. The Dignity Revolution. The Ben Ali regime came to an end following nationwide demonstrations precipitated by high unemployment, food inflation, corruption, a lack of political freedoms like freedom of speech and poor living conditions. The protests constituted the most dramatic wave of social and political unrest in Tunisia in 3 decades and resulted in scores of deaths and injuries, most of which were the result of action by police and security forces against demonstrators. The protests were sparked by the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi on December 17, 2010 and led to the ousting of President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali 28 days later on January 14, 2011, when he officially resigned after fleeing to Saudi Arabia, ending 23 years in power. In the Western media, these events were commonly named the Jasmine Revolution, but the name was not generally adopted in Tunisia itself. Where the name generally used is the Dignity Revolution. Following the overthrow of Ben Ali, Tunisians elected a constituent assembly to draft a new constitution, and an interim government known as the Troika because it was a coalition of three parties, the Islamist Ennahda movement in the lead, with the center-left Congress for the Republic and the left-leaning Etikatal as minority partners. Widespread discontent remained, however, leading to the 2013-14 Tunisian political crisis. As a result of the efforts made by the Tunisian National Dialogue Quartet, the Constituent Assembly completed its work, the interim government resigned, and new elections were held in 2014, completing the transition to a democratic state. The Tunisian National Dialogue Quartet was awarded the 2015 Nobel Peace Prize for its decisive contribution to the building of a pluralistic democracy in Tunisia in the wake of the Tunisian Revolution of 2011. Tunisia's first democratically elected president Beji Caid Essebsi died in July 2019. After him, Kais Saied became Tunisia's president after a landslide victory in the 2019 Tunisian presidential election in October 2019. He had reputation of